Our strategic planning session for our city council. Over the next 2 days, we will be talking about the state of the organization and our current policies, goals, and strategic planning for the upcoming year. We'll talk about our priorities and what we'd like to see as a city council and policy direction to our staff, and we will be also receiving a lot of input from our public during various times of the meeting in the next 2 days. So I want to welcome everyone and call this meeting to order. Could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes, we're getting the statement of values.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Nice. Roll call.
Councilmember Mahan. Councilmember Hardy. Councilmember O'Neill.
Present.
Councilmember Davis. Here. Councilmember Watanabe. Here. Councilmember Shahal.
Here.
And Mayor Gilmore.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, again, welcome to the council, the staff, the public, and our viewing audience out there. So hopefully over the next 2 days, we are going to talk about and develop some clear policies and priorities for the upcoming year. And as we work on a lot of issues, a lot of important issues in Santa Clara, we have a lot on our plate. We have a lot to talk about. So we're, as a council, very interested in the state of the city from the staff's perspective, and also input from our public on all the things that they'd like to see us work on in the next year. So I would like to turn this over to our city manager, Deanna Santana, to kick us off this morning.
Good morning.
Welcome, City Manager.
I too am very excited to spend 2 days focused on the state of the organization, key priorities, and strategies for the next year. I want to start by introducing our facilitator, and you may already recognize Dr. Sean Spano. He was with us last year and facilitated our 2-day session. Dr. Spano has over 18 years working in city government and public organizations. He's a specialist in designing and facilitating public forums. He is also a professor at San Jose State, where he focuses on interpersonal and small group communications and looking at theory and dialogue around practical skills and tools to enable quality communications, as well as areas that support community and organizational development. I want to also acknowledge that he is president of Public Dialogue Consortium, a nonprofit organization that fosters high-quality communication in public sphere, collaborative problem solving, appreciation for different perspectives, and common ground for that action.
Very good. Thank you very much, City Manager Santana. It's a pleasure to be with you all today and again from last year. And so my task here over the next couple minutes is to set the context for how we'll be spending today and how we'll be spending tomorrow. And I want to just pick up on some of what the mayor said. The primary focus of the strategic session is to take stock of the organization. What is the status of the organization, accomplishments, progress that has been made over the last year since the January 2018 strategic session, what is the current status in terms of opportunities, strengths, gaps, and challenges, and pathways forward. What are some opportunities for the organization as you think about moving forward over the next year, over the next 2 years? I'm going to work us through a couple slides here in terms of setting the context around the agenda, and then I have just a couple high-level slides that really set the larger context for the 2-day strategic session. So you'll see here today, day 1, operational. We'll be doing context setting, which I'm doing right now. And when I conclude this piece, we'll actually do a public presentation, which is on the next slide. But the majority of the morning then will be spent on the update on the state of the organization from City Manager Santana. We will also hear from the other two council appointees, from City Attorney Brian Doyle. He'll give an overview about legal services and the role that his office plays in the organization. We'll have an opportunity to hear from the new city auditor, Lynn Lamb, and she'll be able to present her work plan for the city auditor's office. And as I mentioned, talking about some administrative gaps and challenges that were identified last year and the work that staff has done over the year to address those. And so we'll get a couple updates on those key administrative gaps areas, and we'll hear that from HR, an assessment from HR, and then also some procurement reforms that have taken place. We will as we move into the afternoon, there's a physical outlook and budget update, and that also includes a 10-year financial plan. And at that point then, we have established the foundation for the organization. What is the status of the organization? What are those gaps and challenges, accomplishments, how they've been met? And that leads us into item number 6, which is that foundation that supports council's priorities. And we'll actually then walk through the strategic pillars and do a quick update on those strategic pillars. And I should also let council know that before we move into item number 6, we'll do a little activity where I'll ask council to identify what you think are the 1 or 2 top organizational accomplishments over the last year. So that will be our introduction activity, setting up the council priorities. So as we're moving through the day, you might want to think about that. What is that one really important organizational accomplishment, the 2 really important organizational accomplishments that rise to the surface? Now, tomorrow is a priority setting. We'll spend the morning hearing from the executive staff and department heads as they will review their operational priorities within their departments. We then move to a council discussion on priorities, alignment, and resources. Council, having heard the broad overview of the organization in terms of accomplishments and gaps, and then specific operational issues within the individual departments. Now, where is council in terms of your priorities, your strategic pillars? Do they still apply? Are there revisions that need to be made? How should council move forward on those priorities given the state of the organization? And we'll have a fairly extensive conversation about that tomorrow afternoon, and then we move towards wrap-up and next steps. There are some recommendations that staff is wanting from council, and I will share those with you as we progress through the day, and we'll take those up specifically tomorrow afternoon. At the end of the session, that will close out our session tomorrow afternoon. This next slide is a more detailed agenda for today, and I'll just draw your attention to a couple things here. The timeframes, for example, gives you the timeframes, and you'll see as I wrap up here in just a moment, we will move into public presentations and then to the state of the organization. And City Manager Santana will talk about accomplishments, gaps and challenges, opportunities, and as I'll indicate in a slide a little bit later on, one of the key focus of her presentation is really around workforce and what is the status of the workforce in order to deliver on the priorities. You'll see we'll have an opportunity for council questions and discussion following the city manager's presentation. That leads us into lunch. We'll come back here from the 2 council appointees, the attorney and the auditor, and then we'll take a break in the afternoon, and then we'll do the update on the current council priorities. That's where the accomplishment piece comes in. We'll do another public presentation at the end of the day, And notice the time frame for summary of day one at the very end of the day. That's a fairly lengthy amount of time, and that's an opportunity for council to ask questions, having received all this information, to ask staff questions, to have discussion among yourself. And given that we are in workshop kind of mode here today, envisioning a free-flowing, open conversation with council. I will also then, tomorrow morning and even at the end of this afternoon, do a little bit more detailed preview of the session tomorrow, but we can wait for that this afternoon and then tomorrow morning. So let me just highlight a couple slides here that give the really big, large context for today, and this is all designed to segue into the city manager's presentation. I want to draw your attention to this slide, and notice that we start with this slide because it's the governance slide, and it is really the big picture of your organization here. So I'll draw your attention to the upper left corner. The key word there is transitioning to new governance systems. And if we move to the bottom, citywide governance structure, what you can see there is that that is beginning to take shape, and there's some stability that is setting in terms of the citywide governance structure. The city charter, ordinance, policies being reviewed, revised, updated, and frankly, in some cases, ensuring adherence to charter, ordinance, and policies. The organizational systems, we'll hear a lot about that today, and all the movement and work that's been done to update those organizational systems. And your city manager, her approach is to be very deliberate and intentional about governance. And if we move to her quote on the left-hand side, effective governance is the foundation of our ability to manage change. So being very thoughtful, deliberate, and purposeful about the governance structure. Now we move up, and that's where the transition is taking place, obviously, around districting. So your political body is going through a transition, and you're in the middle of that transition. And I know we don't need to go into that in any detail because I know you covered that fairly extensively in December. But notice what staff is having to do. They're managing the change, updating processes, in the process of working within a political environment that is in transition. So simply want to acknowledge that. And there also are unknowns around districting in those first couple bullets on the right-hand side, and then you'll hear more about this today in terms of resource and fiscal capacity to react and implement the new governance system, and that has to do with your processes and systems, but also your workforce. The next slide is a happy slide, because you have now achieved balanced policy approach. You have a pie there with 3 pieces of the pie. You always had policy legislation, excellent. You've always had implementation operations, great staff, wonderful at implementing. But what the missing piece was the audit review and the outcomes and metrics. And so that piece, the new piece, comes in place, and that completes the circle, and you have a full pie here ready to go. And we will get an opportunity to hear from the city manager, the city auditor in just a little bit. And so that lays us out here for your now 3 council appointees. We will hear from the city manager in a moment, and again from the city attorney and city auditor. And just, real briefly here, what does your city attorney do in terms of representing, advising the city on all legal matters, and then the advice, counsel, and guidance when requested by city council. Your city manager, CEO, chief executive officer, leads the administrative side branch of the organization, and then given the complexity of Santa Clara, that your city manager also obviously plays the role of executive director of the Stadium Authority. And now we move to the city auditor, first professional city auditor in the history of Santa Clara, managing annual financial audit, contracts for the city and the Stadium Authority, and then performing those financial, operational, and performance audits for the city. And we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more detail from that from the city auditor. Really important slide here today in terms of setting the context. Last year, we spent a lot of time on process in the strategic session, the January session. And I learned this coming into the organization and meeting with the executive team and doing an offsite with the executive team. Tell me about the state of the organization. What's happening here? What are the strengths? What are the challenges? And the challenge that just rose to the top was we have outdated systems and processes. And that became the focus of really the first, this whole last year was really focused on updating, modernizing those processes to transform the organization. There were manual processes, time-intensive, lack of core service processes, outdated, inefficient. So we spent a lot of time talking about that last year. You'll hear today there's been a lot of progress made. Wonderful progress made, but there's still work to be done there. While that work continues on, the focus now shifts a little bit, and will shift today to people, to workforce. And you need both. You need to have good, solid, modern processes, and you need the people in order to deliver those services with those processes to get to that third box, performance. You need the whole package here. So we didn't talk a lot about workforce last year. That becomes the focus this year, is talking about workforce. The current focus, the need to attract, retain, support high-quality workforce, and to invest in your workforce. And as you'll hear the city manager say, it is your most positive, important asset in the organization. And that all gets towards performance, future focus, and output. It's not fair to have this wonderful staff and wonderful workforce and give them outdated processes. And you might have great processes, but you don't have the workforce that is skilled and capable of actually implementing and utilizing those processes. So the key point here is getting both of those together, and that really does create the full package. On the next slide, this will be my last slide here, and it's a very high-level slide. It's a way of conceptualizing the work of city government. And so this is a tree, obviously, and there's a soil line. Above the soil are council policies and priorities, special projects, attempts to modernize, transform the organization, updating systems and processes. That's all above the soil line because it's not part of your day-to-day operations, which is obviously in the brown below the soil line. Typically, in this model, you think 10 to 20% of staff's time should be spent on those special projects, council priorities, council policy, updating, modernizing the organization. 80 to 90% is below the soil line, is the day-to-day operations, the sort of the core service delivery of the organization. The key here is that the organization now is having to spend a lot of time on updating, modernizing the organization. And that's all falling above the soil line. The trick here is you don't want to get beyond 20% so that, in terms of special projects, so now you are detracting from and diminishing the possibility and minimizing quality service delivery in day-to-day operations. You don't want that to happen. So there's a real challenge here in balancing these two out. And so ultimately, where the organization, you're not there yet, but where you want to get to is that modernizing, transforming the organization, updating systems and processes becomes embedded in the organization and is no longer above the soil line. It's now below the soil because it's part of the everyday operations of the city. You're not there yet, but today is a day to assess where you are at and what needs to happen in order to get there. So with that said then, I'm going to conclude here and I'll turn it over to City Manager Deanna Santana to do her city update, organizational update.
We're going to shift to public presentations.
Oh, I thought we were going to do those after.
Oh, I am sorry. We
are
are on to public
presentations?
presentations. Yes.
Okay, we're going to now move to the public presentation portion of our agenda, and we have a microphone right here for anyone who would like to make a public presentation at this time. Do we have any speakers, Nora? No speakers? But please feel free to come forward. Turn the microphone and yes, so we can see you. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Kurt.
Good morning, Mayor,
lift it up too, so he doesn't have to bend over?
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you,
our
Kurt.
Assistant.
We should hire you.
Is
We
that a
should
city
hire you
employee
as our
or is
AV
this man?
guy.
Okay.
All right. As you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that the world needs to stop burning fossil fuels in 12 years in order for the global average temperature to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's 12 years to stop burning fossil fuels. Obviously, we're not going to make that. Scientists will have to figure out how to suck carbon dioxide out of the air and store it somewhere, but that's going to be very expensive. We see the effects of climate change now, and it's expensive. 3 major hurricanes in 2017 costing over $250 billion. The PG&E bankruptcy due to wildfires. And believe it or not, this polar vortex where my son is currently freezing in minus 50-degree weather. The best way to stop global warming is for all of us to get serious about moving to renewable energy, electric transportation, and more efficient all-electric buildings. Silicon Valley Power used to be the leader in renewable energy, but now has fallen well behind Palo Alto and the community choice energy programs like Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I originally got involved with Santa Clara politics and government when I looked at the city's climate action plan, which was terrible. When I realized that the cap was a product of the planning department, I got involved in the planning commission. Silicon Valley Power is our best opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions, followed by the planning department, which has influence on building codes and traffic. I'm giving the city a grade of D in its efforts today. Almost every city around us has a sustainability manager. Santa Clara can find $4 million to fight an SVRA lawsuit, but can't seem to figure out how to budget for a sustainability manager. I predict that once again the climate action plan will be terrible. The city is not engaged with residents as to how to improve the cap, and without a sustainability manager, there's little concentrated effort on this cap. I'm pleased that the city manager added sustainability as 7th pillar, but we and our kids need for this to be a high priority of the council. I'm pleased that we don't have plastic water bottles here today, but the effort to reduce our carbon footprint requires a dedicated sustainability manager. Since Larry Owens retired, I've been trying to meet with SVP. The excuse is always that the department is understaffed and too busy. I have the agendas for Silicon Valley Clean Energy's Customer Program Advisory Group and San Jose Clean Energy's Clean Energy Community Advisory Commission. Palo Alto also has a Utility Advisory Committee. On the Planning Commission, I've seen many plans for data centers. I've seen power usage effectiveness numbers as bad as 1.3 and as good as 1.09. The city has no requirement on what the PUE should be for data centers, and they're sprouting up all over. We need a sustainability manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning, Council and Mayor and Council. As a way to start off my comments, I'd like to say that I'm always focused on how we can use technology to help us out of our challenges that we have today, and as the center of what's possible. I hope that this city can lead the way with technology solutions, whether it be the e-scooters and whatnot, to technology on light poles, to Internet 2 type things. I hope that's a priority for this city. But what I'm really here today to talk to you about or ask you about is to think about worker equity and the equity of our society and how polarized it's become and how separated it's become between the high wage earners and the non-tech workers, that I'll say. Even the middle income wages have become low-income jobs, and that's a real problem for our community to survive here. I'm here to talk about, and I hope that you will embrace the idea of the Worker Cooperative Initiative. It provides equity for the employees, the worker owners, and allows people in industries that typically do not have worker ownership or employee ownership to actually be owners of a business while they're working there. There are many examples in the Bay Area. Our particular business is a worker cooperative. It's the first one in the city of Santa Clara, and actually as a brick and mortar in the county of Santa Clara. While that may seem like a really great distinction, I think it's a very sad statement for where we are right now. And I hope that the city of Santa Clara can address that. My big ask for you to consider when you're going through your priorities. I know your priorities are tomorrow. I won't be able to be here tomorrow, so I'm going to share that ask now, is to schedule the study session that was talked about at last year's goal settings and throughout the state of the city, which I know other priorities have come up this year, and I respect that, but I would respectfully request that this is an investment in the city's future and the community here, that we need to get this information out to the community, to the small business owners, and what they call the silver tsunami of the many small business owners that are retiring and closing their businesses. I also believe that this is an economic development issue, and I would ask you to consider when you come time to budget in these priorities. Other cities have done this. So they actually give money to the Economic Development Department to help fund some of these efforts for small businesses to educate and learn about how worker cooperatives are formed and how they can convert. And I would also suggest that this ties into the sustainability pillar and the economic pillar, which is kind of the 1 and the 7 on your pillars, kind of like the bookends of your pillars. I believe that this falls right squarely into that, because to have a sustainable society and sustainable community, you need to be able to have worker equity and equity and fairness in your local business. And I hope that is something that you guys prioritize this, and we can get this done in the first half of this year. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any other public presentations? Okay, seeing none, we will have a public presentation portion a little bit later on our agenda today. City Manager.
All right. I'll wait for the PowerPoint presentation to come up, but in the meantime, what I want to do is take the opportunity to introduce 3 new staff members. If you recall, last year we identified gaps in 3 areas. One is a public records manager, a contracts manager, and a risk manager. Excited that they have joined the organization recently, as of maybe this week and over the last 2 weeks. I want to first start by introducing Dominique Davis. She's our public records manager. She joins us from the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, where she served as the deputy clerk, executive assistant, and maintained the official records, actively supported open data policy, and led efforts to improve records management and retention processes. Dominique has a bachelor's in organizational management from Ashford University, and she is a notary public and was recently the California Special District Certified Board Clerk, but also the 2017 President of the Association of Board Clerks and Executive Assistant of Monterey County. So let's welcome Dominique. Our second introduction is Grace Doherty. She's our contracts manager. Grace has over 20 years of experience in purchasing, contracts management, project management, and customer service. She joins us from the city of San Jose, where she was responsible for facilitating large and complex procurements and negotiations of contracts. And she has let me just turn the page here. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Phoenix in business management, and also an immense amount of public sector background and experience. Welcome, Grace. Last introduction is Greg Bite. I believe that I forgot how to pronounce your last name, Greg, but I'll continue with the introduction. Greg served as the Chief Financial Officer for San Diego County Employees Retirement Association, which is a $12.3 billion retirement trust fund with over 42,000 members. He has also served for 25 years in the city of San Diego, where he has held the interim chief financial officer position, as well as the director of risk management. As the director of risk management, Greg managed $250 million of San Diego city programs, including workers' compensation, public liability, employee safety, and employee benefits, as well as he served as a trustee for a 457 deferred compensation plan. Greg holds a bachelor's in economics from San Diego State University. So welcome, Greg. And I know this is usually done last, but I want to do this as part of my opening comments, because today you will see a very high quality setup of logistics here in this room, as well as the presentation that we will provide. I want to just get started with thanking our communications and AV system, our facilities staff, our IT team, and all of the executive leadership team who are here, who have worked very tirelessly to put together a good 2-day session. So thank you in advance, and with that, I'll get started.
Thank you.
So I want to start by just sharing the quote of, "You can't do today's job with yesterday's methods and be in business tomorrow." I think that's a good context-setting quote about where we're at with respect to our workforce, and thinking about this from a perspective of what are the investments and if we look at our workforce as an asset and investment, what's the current state of what this organization is providing them? You are the board of a very complex organization with a complex set of staffing and assignments, and we want to bring you into that background so that you understand the strength, the vulnerabilities, and the areas that we need to focus on. As part of my presentation, I also want you to think about data as information asset. The data that we will provide today provides a background for informing decisions and understanding the metrics that support decision making. Our workforce is also an investment and an asset, and we need to look at it in that, because when you look at the budget coming up, it is your largest investment that you place. I will ask you to consider, in the context of the presentation and the data that I present, as well as our executive leadership, in evaluating the council priorities. And as already has been stated in the public presentations, I am recommending that we add a pillar. I'm cautious about it given our resource constraints, and that we look at our workforce pillar and make amendments to it. So with that, I want to get started with the context setting. This is a really important slide, and I want to spend a little bit of time on it because it tells you where we stand with respect to our resources. This is a slide that talks about our full-time equivalents per capita. When you look at where Santa Clara falls, two immediate observations can be easily made. On the one hand, Palo Alto and Mountain View are on top of the chart with the most resource-rich organizations, and it's important to acknowledge that they are almost half of our size, and yet they have more staffing. When you look at the city most comparable to Santa Clara, that's the city of Sunnyvale, it's easily observed, and what we've done, I don't know if my pointer is working here, but it's easily observed, it doesn't work on the screen, that when normalized for removing the utilities, because that's unique to the city of Santa Clara, Sunnyvale and some of the other cities don't have an electric utility, as well as the public safety resources. We understand the resources alone for just operations, and I'm in the third column from the right, it's circled. When we take out public safety and utilities and provide a normalized review, compared to Sunnyvale, a larger city, geographically larger as well, they have nearly 100 more FTEs than the city of Santa Clara. I know firsthand that the city of Sunnyvale is far less complex. They don't have a number of city services and other public agencies that they support. I say this because when we talk about workload, staff constraints, understaffed resources, and the commitment of our workforce, it comes within the context that we are certainly doing more with a lot less. And so we'll revisit this slide throughout the year when we talk about work plans and we talk about staffing resources. But again, I think this is a good context setting for our resources and the state of our workforce. We've mentioned before that the city of Santa Clara has 3 lines of service. Obviously the city, the municipal agency, Silicon Valley Power, which is a DBA, and the Stadium Authority, which is a separate public agency. When we look at the city of Santa Clara, just to understand how it fares when compared to surrounding cities, it's important to acknowledge that we have several different amenities within our organization that are not conventional lines of service. We have the convention center, our partnership with San Jose for the regional wastewater facility. We're the capital of data centers in Silicon Valley. We have a major regional shopping center. We have 3 educational institutions for advanced education, as well as an amusement park. Each of these brings a unique approach for how we deliver services and where we spend our resources. I want to spend more time on looking at our staffing. I want to first start with, we are really, truly built for operations. While we showed the tree and above the soil and below the soil, we actually have less than 10 to 20% available to dedicate to innovation, transformation, process improvement, and executive management. last year I showed this slide just as a distribution of our staffing. And we have 1,116 full-time equivalent positions. When I showed this slide last year, I also showed that 276 and 406 were dedicated to public safety and utilities. Combined with the operations of, these are direct people providing day-to-day services, I can't pull them from their direct service, either a counter, in the field, in the parks, in order to come and help me with a staff report or a contract or a procurement. These are people constantly providing the good Santa Clara service that our community depends on. That equals about 92% of our investment and resources. When we look at the management policy analysis, we have 96 FTEs in that category, and I'm at the bottom left. I'm going to share some data around that because it helps inform our decisions going forward with council priorities and resources. That 96 number is actually made up of council, our municipal billing employees, IT, our clerk's office, city manager's office, and attorney's office. I think it's important to acknowledge, though, that when we look at the numbers of that 96, we don't use the mayor and council, obviously yourselves, to write the reports, drive the innovation, hands on the ground to implement the continuous improvement. We have 6 city clerk administrative only staff who are dedicated to archiving our records and doing the normal clerk work. 32 of those positions are dedicated to our municipal billing service. And then our very small IT department, which is comprised of 7, are in process of implementing 34 system upgrades or replacements at once. I don't pull them for staff reports or for continuous improvement. That said, we are left with 41 full-time equivalents to advance process improvements, innovation, modernization. When we look at the 41 positions, and there's the breakdown of where you get your 41, city manager and city attorney, human resources, and other, which are your risk manager, contracts manager, public records manager. It's important to acknowledge that those 41 people were hired with job descriptions that were published for which the position they applied for and were hired. So when you look at how they spend their day, when you look at the resources, they are working executive managers. They have direct responsibilities over staff. They have to perform their legally required commitments to manage, which leaves us really with about less than 5% of total hours to drive the change and assign capacity that the council has with new initiatives or process improvements that must be done, and in some cases, new laws that we must adhere to. So we're really talking about 3,800 hours where we have discretionary time. I think it's important to say at this time as well that often, much like this week, staff has already put in 40 hours. We had a 17-hour day on the council day alone, and that we depend on staff not flexing their time during the week in order to provide the commitments that are required to serve this community. This is very limited, and I want to drive that down because it is something that I need to work through when we look at our workforce as an asset and as an investment. I also want to acknowledge, and I've shared this before, the context for which we are driving change. I thought it was well said when we had the governance chart around there's change within the organization for driving process improvements. There's change at the top with the governance structure related to council districts. But we have some high-risk environments from also our processes, our manual systems, and I also think that our workforce with respect to the understaffed or unstaffed resources presents another area of high risk. We've already acknowledged in several conversations around the low trust environment, and it's something that I think we've made incredible progress on going forward. I want to get back to this slide. So within that context, when I started, I talked already about the deferred and delayed council priorities. We've been playing a lot of catch up. There's been areas of reform that we've launched and we've had to advance to prevent weaknesses or continued gaps. We've had a mutual desire to serve Santa Clara well, which is why there is a high level of commitment and accomplishments within the context of understaffing. And I, as the city manager, have had to look at managing this complexity, looking at our being financially astute, given the challenges that are clearly ahead of us, as you'll hear later today, adding strategic value so that we figure out what we can accomplish and how to advance the strategies within our constraints, as well as instilling trust both within the organization, community, and certainly with the city council. By doing that work, I've established that there's 4 areas that represent my core services as the city manager. There's obviously the support for the city council and strategic policy development. There's largely advancing the organization. It's an organization that is at a unique time with driving change that the council has desired. The realities of understanding the quality of our operations and where we're strong and where we're vulnerable, and managing the capacity and the workload. I've said it before that our workload exceeds our capacity, and you've allowed for me to say that, and I continue to. Thank you very much. Uh-oh. I don't know if that was you, Kendra, or me, but I'm going to put the pointer down for this. So, summary of identified gaps. This comes from last year. None of this should be a surprise to any of us because we've had multiple updates throughout the year in terms of what is it that we're trying to address. Whether it's a lack of citywide risk management function, this is one where we have the privilege of having a good risk manager in place. We need to resource him now. There's clearly a large portfolio. We need to look at how we provide support services for him so that he can accomplish the mission that he is hired to. We've talked about our citywide performance. We're including a new feature here. You'll see stacked charts of our workload over a horizon. We'll start to present those charts when we talk about new initiatives and how we'll need to adjust those so that the council and the public understands the impact of absorbing new assignments within limited capacity. We've hired a procurement manager who's done an incredible assessment and has already started by just doing new initiatives that allow for us to catch up on procurement. But we will continue to have to work on that portfolio of work. I want to put here, this past Tuesday, you approved our legislative advocacy positions. But we do need to look at how we further support our intergovernmental relations functions. We are part of a larger region that the world looks to for innovation. There's a lot of legislation that impacts that work. We need to be more active from that perspective. I also want to talk about the stable leadership and change management. Starting last year, I haven't been shy about walking into a city manager's office that had a 60% vacancy with a strategy of many acting positions. You'll see some of the hiring activity, and we'll probe more deeply as we get into this PowerPoint presentation about the conditions for which we are recruiting in a really tough labor market for this region. So in terms of state of the organization, from a city manager's perspective, before we get into the pillars, these are the areas that I have reported out publicly on that are important to spend a little bit of time of some of the change that we've driven that support achieving the council pillars. So the first is organal transformation. I started by sharing my value system as a city manager, these obviously professional values, and sending them out and training around them and sending communications regularly with employees. For 2019, what I'm launching is the city manager, I'm calling it Friday in the Field. I've had the opportunity in January to be side by side in our community development department at our permit counter and just do a walkthrough to understand what are the transactions, the systems that are in place, everything from learning the scheduling to understanding space constraints in the workplace. I've already talked about stabilizing the leadership and what was in the manager's office, workload alignment. As you'll see part of the presentation, there are stacked diagrams that are publicly available for each member of the public or council member to understand the department's initiative workload and the schedule that we're trying to implement. From an organizational development efforts, we've obviously established an executive team. We have functional oversight assignments where we're engaging in quality quarterly management meetings where we offer training, as well as we've changed our fiscal approach, for which we'll explain all of the changes that have been made through our fiscal presentation. We're using data to make informed decisions. Some of that we'll present to you today. In the context of not having systems that produce the data, which means that we have to manually track it, but it is value add with respect to the information that we are trying to present for making decisions. And our meeting management, we implemented Granicus and Legistar, which allows for us to complete our packets for the council through a software system, and we've implemented new tools that we'll talk about later. For keeping the council informed, we have integrated a couple of new features with respect to informational memos, more robust executive director or city manager reports out. We talk more frequently about our community outreach plans, and we articulate them so that there's transparency around the expected efforts. You saw firsthand one in play this Tuesday when there was frankly a mistake on our part where there was a commitment of a study session and it was wrongly noticed on the agenda and we had to defer that. We're tracking that. It shows a great commitment from our community of holding us accountable to our community outreach plans and acknowledging where we make mistakes. We are trying to pace our policy items. We have some good data that we'll present later on around why it's important to pace our policy items that come before council. As well as we have a greater level of transparency. A year ago, we were just barely beginning to launch our Legistar and Granicus process. We now have a tentative meeting agenda calendar, and I can remember when I was looking at the 2017 goal-setting session, there was discussion from the council's part. This is now part of our regular business where we share months out of what's on the agenda so that the public knows. And most recently, I wasn't here the evening, I'm hoping that it was announced, our council referral matrix. We publish monthly all of the referrals that the council has provided. We started in October. We provided our first report in January. You will see it on February 5th, so that you know how we're tracking on each of those referrals, what our estimated date of completion is, and whether we have completed it. These are all very handy documents for you to hold us accountable, but also to be transparent around level of work in progress. The legislative advocacy positions, I've already talked about that. It allows for us an efficient way to advocate Santa Clara's position at the state or federal level, as well as to stay regionally connected and at the pace that legislation moves. And we've addressed our administrative failures. We've talked about travel, contract, PRAs, audit functions, all of the above. Those we've been able to accomplish in the last year. Fiscal sustainability, we developed a 10-year financial plan. It is now a working document that the council regularly refers to when making decisions. And it is, I like to think of it now as just institutionalized. I look forward to seeing it updated and acknowledging how it's impacted. And you'll see some sensitivity testing for it later as part of your financial report out. We corrected an $8.5 million budget shortfall last year, and we're able to solve a $1 million shortfall with minor service cuts, but largely that was a huge accomplishment. We also know that our budget rests on some unknowns. You'll hear about them later today, the largest, of course, being CalPERS reforms or any economic slowdown. We're now in a 2-year budget cycle, which allows for us some relief and more strategy to think through how we put forward budget solutions and recommendations. And we're building our financial reserves. You'll see a chart later, and we are on track to have a reserve at almost $80 million, which is unprecedented for the city of Santa Clara. And you'll hear, we've already presented a robust revenue strategy. We'll pull that work out and show you later on this today how we need, which items we want to pull forward for more work and direction to the city manager so that we can get started. Long-term strategic planning, we've accomplished a lot in the past year. We now have an overall vision for innovation and how we advance our work. You saw that firsthand through the Silicon Valley Power Strategic Plan. We have land use specific plans underway, infrastructure inventory so that you know the state of our infrastructure and as well as where those priorities need to be placed. Our Stadium Authority Business Management, we issued a one-year report as well as our work plan for next year. Some of that will be represented today, but there is a tracking system now of accomplishments and work that we're trying to accomplish. Our Santa Clara Downtown Visioning process is well underway, and we are tracking that. City Place settlement agreements, you received your first one-year report. That is now part of our process of tracking and reporting to council. And we'll present some information around workforce training and development, which is a component and focus of today's session. From administrative improvements, you'll hear about our procurement processes, where our work needs to be placed. You'll hear an update from our audit function. These are all things that we didn't have last year, by the way. And so this is just acknowledging that we've come this far to be able to present information in this manner is progress in and of itself. And we'll get to our public records, which we continue to bog down. When we talk about public records and I present the data around this service or core service, I want to share that this is a great example of we are so overwhelmed with the workload. We already have the technology, we've procured it. We do not have the staff capacity to implement it. And you will see that in several other examples where we know what the technology solution is, we just don't have the resources to turn the corner and bring about that improvement. From this perspective, this is just more about our administrative improvements with respect to accomplishments. We are looking at how we de-risk business processes. We had a great first day meeting with our new risk manager on areas that the manager and the city attorney thought were priority areas. I've already seen him in meetings having those conversations to learn more about what our plan of attack will be. There are some remaining gaps. Many of these remaining gaps are either under-resourced or have no resources. And we'll need to figure these out together. Sustainability is obviously one that has been under-resourced. It will be before you for your consideration as part of your action. We'll talk about that in greater detail in terms of summarizing the actions that we've done. We don't have a continuous improvement set of staff or resources that allows for us to build strategies. It comes as a collateral duty where we're all working to figure out what little bit of collateral resources we can assign to drive the change. We do need increased marketing and use of a citywide CRM. We've had fantastic community response to our CRM, but it does present resource challenges. So with that, let's get to some of the data. Again, our data tells a story, and our data is an incredible asset for us. I presented a chart at last year's retreat called Major Drivers of Workload. We've kind of changed this up. We're going to focus mostly on the large blue, dark blue circles and report out some high-quality data for the council to be informed about how these areas of drivers of workload are trending. It doesn't mean that the ones are in the middle aren't important. It just means we're more challenged for getting data. So from a public record standpoint, what we were able to track over 2018 is that we had 1,321 public records requests. Each of these vary from complexity, volume, and where we are at with respect to other assignments and how we have to absorb those public records. As you well know, when we get a public records request, the time starts ticking. We have 10 days to determine how is it that we're going to respond and whether we request more time or produce records. That means that on average, we're responding to 110 PRAs per month. without any additional resources and through a manual system. We also have 2 new laws that will greatly impact us, and will present a budget amendment through our public safety departments, because we are now under SB 1421 required to disclose records for peace officers for certain types of incidences. And through AB 748, we have to now provide body-worn camera video and audio. We don't have the resources and systems in place. We are looking at what is happening statewide so that we can pick up from that expertise and background in terms of strategies for complying with this new law. I've already acknowledged that from a system standpoint, it's largely manual. We have procured the software to be able to use technology to respond to the records, but we don't have staff in place because we're bogged down with assigning capacity to responding to the records. For 2017, we didn't have data collected, and so for next year, you'll have 2019's PRA tracking, and we'll present to you, we'll start to be able to present trend information about how we're faring. This is a significant assignment. It's silent, it's unnoticed, it's just paper that keeps moving within the organization. From a boards and commissions standpoint, I presented how we were faring last year. It looks like we're stable relatively with respect to meetings. I can say that when we look at the staffing assigned in the limited 41, it's largely a collateral duty. We don't have staff with the exception of maybe Planning Commission, where they're completely assigned to staffing a boards and commission. This comes through flexing schedules and through report writing from the 41 folks that are just bogged down doing other things, but no change here from a trend information. From a council meeting perspective, we are up 17% since last year with respect to meetings, 64% when we look back to 2013. Largely 54 meetings, we're looking at 1 meeting per week. When we looked at the staff reports that we're producing year to year, we picked November because this is when we started doing the presentation. We can look at other data, but what we found was we're up 21% when we look at year to year, the number of staff reports per agenda. You can see it on any agenda. We're going into consent calendar, double letters. We almost hit Z this past year. And which means that on average for each council agenda, we're producing 44 staff reports. This is the mad cycle because staff works on 3 agendas at once. And we still close out. So prospectively, we're 3 agendas out, and we still now have council referrals that we're tracking that we need to catch up on. I've said before that every report needs to go through our finance department, our director, our city attorney, and the city manager. So at any time of the week, we are working on producing those 44 reports to publish an agenda. That's the case today, where we have an agenda to produce tomorrow for Tuesday's meeting. Council referral standpoint, we began tracking council referrals in October, which was the 4th quarter. The council referred 122 referrals. We've closed 93 of those referrals, and we'll report out on how we're closing them. Of those 122 referrals, 51 have required a report for which we've issued. Others can be completed through the city manager biweekly or through information memos, or we're just able to implement based on council direction, or we'll address as part of the budget process. This means that at each council meeting, on average, we're generating about 8 new referrals. We're able to close 7 referrals, and we're beginning 2019 with 28 open referrals. So that's just a workload that we carry with us. So what does this data tell us? The summary of the data tells us that our council meetings have increased. Our boards and commission meetings remain high, but the same. We're issuing more reports to the council. I believe they are more informative, they're more thorough. Our software system remains an area of growth. We're just a year into it. It shows at the meetings when it's down and when it has glitches. And it's part of our transformation. Technology takes time to transform, and we've achieved 1 year. We're now tracking our council referrals so that it's a workload metric for us, and we're able to report out on that. It tells me that there's a significant amount of city resources dedicated to our transparent government and improved engagement. I have some statistics of how these numbers roll out. When you look at the averages on council agenda reports based on the council meeting frequency, we are producing average of 215 reports per month. When we look at the council referral information memos, the reports that need to close out those referrals, and the agenda packets. Again, largely within those 41 FTEs. Here's our council priorities of what we hope to accomplish within the first part. I'm looking at this more from a 3 to 6 month part of the calendar year. I've highlighted the orange ones because those are the ones that are current, need attention now. Our fiscal sustainability revenue strategy, we are right in the middle of preparing for you a stadium authority budget, which will release on February 19th. It's a mission critical project. You have to consider the budget in March, and we have to produce it for study session. Downtown revitalization efforts, that needs some work with respect to the RFP, making those selections to keep that effort going. Redistricting, our governance discussions, cannabis business tax programs, affordable housing policy, as well as some of the land use decisions that you'll be making. Employee survey, you charged us 2 sessions ago with getting an employee survey out. Our goal is this spring. Our HR reforms are on a critical path because we have vacancies and we have some recruiting that we need to do. For example, for our city place, we're launching that project. Their schedules are very aggressive in the February-March timeframe, and we have no staff to implement these projects. Looking at some of the implementation schedules, we know that our staffing requires about 6 to 9 months. It shows in the 3 positions that I introduced today. You approved those in June. We were able to place staff in January. And so all of this needs to be measured around how do we get this done just in time to make sure that City Place construction and pre-construction activities are successful. Risk with respect to engineering solutions and developing a City Place risk management program is obviously something that we have to work on within our first 3 months in the calendar year. We've already had action on a recycling procurement this week, but it doesn't. We still have work on mission trails and the longer-term contracts. We have 5 open tables that are on a mission-critical schedule as well. Agri-Hood, we have to do the follow-up actions and finish up those agreements. The mobile transportation policy, implementing new state laws. I talked about the pre-construction, and also census. Census is very important to participate because it has financial consequences. The higher the count, the higher the federal allocations by formula that come to Santa Clara. Most cities dedicate general fund capacity for enhanced outreach. It's something we'll want to look at because at the table it means financial consequences for the city. Here's just a reflection of when we refer to a one-line item on the chart before as a large-scale development. This is just a sampling of some of the large-scale. The good news, or maybe perhaps the mixed news, is we have great development projects. The scale of them is envied throughout the nation, but the realities are they are high touch and require high resources dedicated. Employee relations, just wanted to, for transparency purposes, speak to the open tables. Our Police Officers Association, electrical workers, engineers, police management, and our non-sworn public safety. In addition to those priorities that are under the city umbrella, the municipal service, if we go back to the 3 lines of business, I wanted to introduce the other priorities that we must accomplish in the 3 to 6 month timeframe for Stadium Authority and Silicon Valley Power. And I added the convention center because it is an unconventional service for a municipal agency, and it is too on a critical path. For Convention Center, we will be bringing forward a recommendation for a new operator on Tuesday. We need to concurrently finish out the reconciliation of the past provider, as well as make sure that we have a solid transition plan in place so that we continue to keep our convention center operations sustained, and resolve the TID goals and efforts so that it aligns and we leverage those services for the convention center success. This alone is on a mission-critical schedule of about 6 to 8 weeks with respect to the termination of the old contract and the initiation of the new and the smooth transition. From the Stadium Authority perspective, there's the ongoing work of compliance with agreements and oversight of agreements. I want to just touch on the last item, which is due diligence on the 49ers fiscal forecasting. I don't think it's been a secret. It's been a matter of in the media that there is an 85% drop in revenue projections. It is absolutely imperative before we put a draft proposal out for the board to consider that we understand each of those assumptions and details that is driving for our management company to bring down revenue by 85%. That is a mission-critical assignment for us, and we're on a 6-week critical path. On the Silicon Valley Power, one of the critical path issues for me are items 18 and 19. PG&E filed its bankruptcy on Tuesday, and I like to think of this in 3 categories that we need to consider. One is any direct relationships that we have with PG&E and areas that pose risk for Silicon Valley Power. The second category is our partnership through Northern California public agencies. We have contracts through NCPA with PG&E, and Silicon Valley Power represents 40% of NCPA. Any impacts that flow through NCPA obviously impact Silicon Valley Power. And lastly, I'm watching particularly, and I was quoting some of the issues of what the judge said this week on the bankruptcy, how risk is evaluated and the framework that risk is evaluated for PG&E with respect to maintenance of the infrastructure and the systems is a framework that how Silicon Valley could be measured against with respect to risk or litigation if something happens. It's absolutely important that we stay on top of this and we dedicate the resources. We have a critical vacancy within Silicon Valley at this time, a chief electric utility officer. The good news is we have a solid bench. I've had the opportunity to engage with our assistant directors. Each of them bring incredible institutional knowledge as well as industry knowledge. Those are critical paths for other areas and lines of business. Around the corner is our voters approved an advisory vote for titled Measure N for council districting, and we need to get started on a work plan to engage our community on next steps for that advisory vote. In February, you will see we will solicit input from the council in terms of policy development, as well as provide an update with respect to the ordinances that would allow for the regulation of cannabis and allow for us to put in place a cannabis business tax, which may have some revenue opportunities for the city of Santa Clara. I do want to highlight, though, and as recent as this week through KQED, there is a significant reset with respect to the economic forecasting for cannabis that is occurring statewide as well as in other surrounding states that have already engaged in business taxes in cannabis industry. We need to understand that better so that we can look at what does that mean for our financial forecasting going forward. Back to some data. From a communication standpoint, this is a great place to start because our workforce, looking at it as an asset and investment, and the data tells a significant story. 2018 was a tough year for communications for the city, and the council has been very clear that it wants to drive more communications out to the community. We've had good results. We're up 85% when it comes to press releases and pushing out communications to the community. But I want to acknowledge that 2018 was marked by significant vacancies within the communications section. We had 3 FTEs, one of which was eliminated through the budget process to resolve that $1 million shortfall. And at the time, our communications manager, Jennifer Yamaguma, was assigned out to the clerk's office, who had a clerk's vacancy, an assistant clerk vacancy, and so it left us with 1 staff down, Jennifer Yamaguma filling the clerk's position, the assistant clerk's position, and the PIO position. That is a great reflection of this organization, and I'll go into it more when we talk about website. Those are examples when I say collateral duty or understaffed. Yet the commitment of this small remaining set of staff still was able to produce data metrics of 81% performance over past years. On community engagement, these are some metrics around social media, what we've been able to produce, the engagement from the community in terms of following our work. I always think it's very interesting that we have over 40,000 people are subscribers to our e-notify system. That means people want to know what's happening at a legislative level. We've had 20 open city hall surveys. There's slides that support the information. One thing that's missing from this slide, and I wanted to acknowledge by comment, the story that it tells just to reinforce communications. We are significantly behind in pushing out our new website. It is absolutely a critical asset for Santa Clara to have a modern website in the center of what's possible in the center of the Silicon Valley. I can share firsthand, this was an assignment in Sunnyvale that we did, and it became an award-winning website, but it was staffed with 2 part-time positions that were fully dedicated to website writing and looking at each page, and about a $300,000 contract to supplement the 2 FTE, the 2 part-time positions, as well as to help with the architectural design of the website. That's not the case here. It has been absorbed by the 1 staff down in the context of all the vacancies that I use the PIO manager for, and we are significantly delayed. But you can, just like the Public Records Act, we have the procurement in-house, we've purchased it, we just don't have the resources to turn the corner. These are real-life examples of work that's meaningful to the public, to the council, to the workforce, but the conditions for which they rest on. So from a community engagement standpoint, this is how we've spent our time and where the shift has been year to year. You can see that much capacity was gained from taking a 1-year hiatus from committees to allow for us to advance accomplishments and stabilize the organization. A lot of that was assigned to the addition of council meetings where boards and commissions as well as community meetings have been maintained relatively stable. So it's just data that shows what we were saying. Let's stop the committees to create capacity for additional policy advancement. Open City Hall, I mentioned earlier about how we're trending, where we're at 20 surveys. This is a reflection of an easy way to engage with our community and receive their input through the website. And certainly we've put that in place. We're 150% up since its launch in 2016. And the next 3 slides just provide a scan of the types of surveys that we've been pushing out, multiple full spectrum services of surveys to gather public input. From day one, when I started, I can remember my first week making a public presentation about my interest in making sure that we have a good customer relations management system tool in place so that as constituents record concerns or complaints, we have a way of capturing those. A CRM is the easiest way, and we relaunched it after talking between January and July about what are the areas that we need to focus on. And our IT department was able to relaunch it in July, and you can see the data that we're tracking there. Our downloads increased 100%. Again, this is a great reflection of our community's willingness to engage with us through technology. And we are tracking with respect to monthly usage up as well. And so when we look at the workforce impact on the operation side of when we launched our CRM, what does it mean in terms of workload and how is it that it speaks to us in terms of service areas? We know that from 2018, since the launch, we've received 1,871 new requests. 52% were high demand for public works. And here is the data that it reflects where our community is reflecting concerns or areas that need our attention. So we are working internally and administratively to deploy out and create schedules and resources around how is it that we keep up with our communities noticing changes or activity that we need to support. So from a human resource metric, I want to share with you first the regional opportunities of Silicon Valley and context set the environment for which we rest. We already know we are a highly complex region. We're super competitive in the market to recruit and retain, but we need to maintain that. People are interested in coming to work for Santa Clara, but we need to make sure that when they come, they stay. Our community is highly engaged. They have high expectations for service, and we're lucky that we're able to meet those high expectations. The high cost of living bogs us down. It creates limitations with respect to the region for which we can recruit. The unemployment rate is at its unprecedented lowest level, which also means how people shift and work and look for jobs, it's their market. They get to be choosy about where they go. And our business expectations need to match that regional characterization for which we are trying to recruit and retain our staff. The city's built for operations. I think the data shows that. The first slide certainly shows how we rest within the context of our resources. Our workforce, in order to maintain the current service levels, must be highly trained, it must be responsive, and it must be able to advance service delivery. Our current systems are not up to par for our workforce, and that will show both by way of process as well as what we provide our people once they're here to stay. This is a referral, so we get to close it for February 5th. This is where our city workforce live. There was a question posed around how do we know where they're coming from? Largely, they're coming from the South Bay. We're trying to make it heat sensitive, with the next portion being East Bay and the peninsula. So that becomes our circle of where we can recruit, unless we have people who are willing to commute from outside of this region or can afford to make the move here. The good news is that 81% of our workforce is not motivated by the factor of leaving. We looked at years of service and age and tested around how do we understand our workforce. Roughly about 816 full-time employees are not motivated because of those two factors. That means they're ours to keep and ours to lose in the context of a tough market for retaining as well as recruiting. We broke it down a little bit more refined so that you know where kind of the hot spots are within the organization and where is it that we need to focus on. The challenges with this chart, of course, is that for young tenured employees or employees that are not near retirement, it does present issues of building their institutional knowledge so that they understand what has often been termed Santa Clara Way or cultural practices or valued practices that are important to serving the community. There's training needs so that they understand manual processes as well as modern technology, and the combination of how we get our work done. And just being Santa Clara specific, understanding the region and this city and what makes it tick. Opportunities are, this is a completely energetic and committed workforce. They do need training and ensuring that they're, for lack of a better analogy, their knives are sharp to compete in the Silicon Valley. The fact that they are less tenured and younger in their not near retirement age means that we have them for the long term. They're ours to keep through investment. They also can bring modernized practices as they come into the organization, familiar with their efforts. The ones that I circled, you already know as a council, we're challenged with bringing in and competing on our community development side with respect to basic building inspectors, plan reviewers. It's an area that we need to continue to be creative around. How is it that we create a secret sauce that brings in other employees to fill our vacancies? Our electric utility, this is an area where high cost of living directly impacts how we fill those vacancies. Our public safety departments, same story. The news is they often get recruited to serve in some kind of security capacity for our high-tech needs and businesses within the organization. And obviously IT, our IT department is small, and we're competing with the tech industry around us that obviously has a different compensation structure. Our recruitments, we're tracking 36% up, meaning in terms of what are we trying to do? We're actively, as people leave the organization, we're actively trying to get into place to fill those vacancies. When you look at the number of recruitments over the years, you can see in fiscal year 13-14, we're at 66, we're at 90. We've kind of held there for the last 3 years. It's in the context of only adding a half a position. See the earlier comment about initiatives and needs without adding the resources or being understaffed, which is bogging us down because the next slide shows that our trend information is that more people are applying. So this means we have more open vacancies, but we also have more applications. And because we are a civil service organization, we have to review each of those applications to ensure that the applicants meet minimum qualifications for the position before they advance into the recruitment process, the application process further. We're trending 52% up with respect to job applications when you look at the work that was done in 13-14 to 17-18 with a half of FTE more. I think that's important to note. And we also have a manual process. We are implementing NeoGov. It's piloted. It's still very much in its infant stages. And of course, the tech transformation will take some time before we're able to really use it citywide. New hires, we depend on both internal promotions for vacant positions as well as outside hires. We're split about 50-50 when you look at teetering more on the new hires when you look at the past trend for 16-17 and 17-18. And we'll continue to provide this information because as we look at our workforce being less tenured, having more years on the horizon before being motivated to retire, obviously we need to create a path where people can see themselves growing within the organization for promotional opportunities. How we do that is work that we need to strategize on. Employee separations, we are trending a little bit up from year to year from 16-17 to 17-18. We had 50 separations and 36 retirements. This is, again, when you look at the low unemployment level, it's no surprise that some of our employees are separating to take jobs in the private sector. We've had some pretty sudden departures within our public safety department, particularly our police, that leave us, in a position where we have to look at how do we assemble the resources to continue the services. The fact that this is trending up and the fact that the unemployment rate remains low and the conditions that I've described are a real issue for us to think through as we look at our workforce as an asset and an investment. Here's our employee turnover, relatively stable. We're providing year-to-year data. That's probably a good thing in terms of just keeping it stable. If it starts to fluctuate, we'll certainly want to bring information back to council. Top reasons for turning over is relocation. And we talked about this as obviously one of the nation's highest cost of living regions. This is a slide that when I saw it, it's a sad slide. So when we think about, I don't know if you've ever, I think it's out of Apple, particularly Steve Jobs. If you've ever heard the phrase, what happens if we invest in our employees and they leave? Looking at it as a sunken investment. And the response to that is, well, what happens if we don't invest in them and they stay? This is our level of investment. You can see the training statistics. I heard laughter over there. This is sad. These are the training sessions that have been offered. They're single digit from 13, 14, 15, 16. And in 17, we grew in employee development category as well as where we're trending for 18. We have to look at how we invest in our employees from a professional development standpoint as a strategy for recruiting employees when they are potential employees when they're checking us out. They need to know that we are investing in their professional development and that is important for us to make sure that they are highly skilled and they remain highly skilled while working here. For those employees that are here, we have to invest in them if we want to manage the continuous improvement. We've already talked about the limited capacity that we have, and it's stretched. It basically comes as where do we shift our priorities? Building our workforce, investing in their professional development has a direct relationship to increase in capacity. It is a business imperative going forward that this becomes a master strategy that we get right going forward, and if the conditions continue with respect to high cost of living and tough recruitment market. So our data tells a story. I think it's building on the issues of people. We are in the heart of the most competitive job market, high cost of living, hard to recruit employees, shows in the higher number of vacancies because it's hard to retain them as well as the higher number of applications that we have to go through. It also continues on the story that much like what we talked about with public records, website, and communications, we're critically understaffed in our workforce investment in category. So what do we need? We need skilled and up-to-date employees. Our strategies for our workforce need to reflect that. We need to continue to develop their skills and acknowledge they're shining right now. What we have is magic. Under the conditions of manual processes, under or unstaffed resources, the tight margin that we have with discretionary capacity, our accomplishments in the past year, I've said it before to our executive leadership team, if we had this part of our strategy corrected, we would be magic. And it really is a business imperative going forward. So with that, we're on to the next agenda topic.
Very good, thank you. So just a couple quick observations, and now we're going to move in. This is the opportunity, obviously, for council to ask questions and have discussion in response to what you heard from the city manager. Just a couple quick observations. Deanna had mentioned the data piece of that and that the data tell the story. And I think that's another theme that comes out of the session here today, making data-driven decisions and how important that is. And the data doesn't speak for itself. Somebody needs to interpret that and make sense of that in light of the context and what do we do with the data and how does that inform and shape decision making. So I think that was another theme that wove its way through the presentation. And just one other quick observation, and I think it picks up from last year's session, acknowledging, celebrating accomplishments, so important. And at the very same time, confronting reality and not sugarcoating that, and really what is in front of you and what needs to happen in order to move the organization forward. And I heard Deanna say last year at the session, it's not helpful to pretend and to submerge the difficulties and the challenges, and so, but balancing that out. We don't want doom and gloom, but at the same time, we want to confront reality. So I think those were a couple themes that I was picking up as I was hearing the presentation. With that said then, you've all been wonderfully patient and receptive to the information, and so now it's an opportunity, and we have plenty of time for questions, answers, discussions for Deanna or any of the other staff. Who'd like to get us started?
I'll start.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Deanna, for that presentation. I think it's a lot of information for us to absorb, but the great thing is that we have this information, and it's information that we've never had in the past. I remember a year ago we talked about, I must have heard the word data-driven decision-making at least 1,000 times in the last goal-setting session, and seeing this a year later, it's just amazing the data that you and your staff have put together to present to us, because as you said, Dr. Spanos, it gives us the cold hard reality of where we are, but also the utter, I'm in awe of what our limited staff has done in the last year,
right.
and the things that we have accomplished. And it feels like the city has a lot of major accomplishments, but we never have time to talk about them or celebrate them because we're on to the next issue immediately.
So
and
true.
as you know, a day in City Hall is an interesting day because you plan your day, and then you think you have your work plan,
right.
But then I always call them, the drive-bys. They come and things just happen. We read about ourselves in the paper. All of these things happen to us, and our staff is charged with immediately responding and providing the council with the appropriate information so that we can make the decision. So I'm, again, still trying to absorb all of this information. I'm hoping at the end of this session, you will also give us some recommendations on our level of staffing and where we actually need to be to produce the results for our community that our community is going to be requiring, because we're doing so much with so little at this point. Yeah. We're not like other cities like Sunnyvale or Campbell. I mean, we have all these all the major components of a large city, but yet we're still seem to be operating with the staff, of 1972. So we, again, the reality of what's hitting us, how, we are definitely on the right path in terms of modernizing and reforming everything that we're doing here. We're on the right path, but at the same time, we have to make sure our employees are able to handle this and that are healthy and getting what they need so that we can provide the great services to our community for what they need. So
right.
I see that, and I'm glad you laid it out this way. I'm hoping that we'll be able to discuss how we can make it better, how we can improve it, how we can get our staffing levels to where they should be, and providing the resources necessary so we can provide the services to the community. So thank you. I'm still absorbing everything, and you're definitely giving us a lot to talk about.
Excellent, very good. Councilmember O'Neill?
A minor comment, I guess, in light of all the data, and I think for some of us, this is kind of just a confirmation of things that we have thought for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes when you're too down in the weeds, it's like you can't poke your head up and kind of see where you are. You're just so, just cranking stuff from day to day that, it's not clear. And then when as the mayor kind of alluded to, you step back and you really allow yourself the time to get a larger perspective. I mean, so one of my thoughts is that, just, from my other life experiences, in order to help things a little bit, like one thing is I noticed, and maybe this is my just lack of knowledge on the processes here, but I was just thinking, is there a way, like maybe on the council reports, is there a way to delegate more authority on the approval? You know, and I just noticed that there seemed like there were about half a dozen approvers, and it's just a nit observation. It's just something to help a little bit, because and finding the breathing room, like Deanna made reference to a couple of these tools that we have acquired licenses for or whatever, and I can kind of relate, not having the bandwidth to stop and implement those tools, so you just keep, slogging along.
Right.
In the old ways. And one of the other things that I think that this organization, that relatively low number for retirement eligible, a couple of the other bodies where I serve, there's at least one of them that's got over 40% retirement eligible employees.
Yeah.
And they're like quaking in their boots, like if a lot of those people leave at the same time. No joke, one of the groups, and I won't say which one, is the part of the retention strategy is that unfortunately several key employees have gotten a divorce, and so they are having to work longer. And I know we had a little bit of that here, but one of them, it's happened several times. And like I said, guys, this is not a good strategy for the future.
Not a sustainable strategy.
To count on that employees are going to keep getting divorced. So in a way, that's an opportunity for us. And as like Deanna said also, I like that phrase, the employees are ours to lose.
Right.
So, I've been a huge advocate for the employee survey because, once again, in my prior life, even in the worst of times, and there were a lot of them, we did employee surveys every year and just pulled that scab off the wound and really talked about what was going on and figured out, from the top all the way down to the bottom level, what could we do to work on those issues and encourage the comments like, okay, how can we do this improvement, and making sure that everybody knew, like quarter to quarter, what are our goals and are we on track? Each person, are you on track with your goals to contribute to the goals of the whole enterprise? So I think I just hope that we get a little bit of bandwidth so that we can bring that kind of culture here.
And Councilmember O'Neill, did I hear you say that there might be an opportunity to reduce the number of approval steps?
Well, I'm just wondering.
I'm
not
throwing
an expert.
That out as a
I just kind of
possibility.
wondered because, once again, that was something that I saw in my business life, that one of the things that we looked at to try to streamline that, to give some little empower. And now we have an audit function. That was part of some of the things that we did was that we gave more empowerment, but there was the training, there was the education, and like if you screw up or if you don't follow correctly, it's going to get caught, and then you're going to have problems. So people knew, yes, they had a little bit more empowerment, but they were, that they knew how to use it judiciously.
Yeah. And then I'm also thinking, as staff presents, we might want to ask the question initially: how are things going in your marriage? Just as a way, sort of take the temperature here. I joke.
Are we
I
actually
joke.
allowed to do that?
Yeah, and which is why I joke as I turn to our HR person over, your
joking.
HR director over there. Councilmember Davis?
Deanna, I have to tell you that I read this last night because Kendra gave me the book, and I'm in bed until midnight reading the first part of this. And I remember saying to you, we need to audit everything. We need to get to the place. Our first goal setting was eye-opening for us because we looked at a 10-year process. Now you've drilled down to, do we have the capabilities of going forward and implementing what we need to do? And as Lisa calls them, the drive-bys, we are part-time. And when we come in, any one of these people can say, hey, what about this or whatever? Or we'll go to you and say, can I speak to a director because I have a problem? And it's either within the community or something that's been raised, a phone call, whatever. But to show us the bandwidth that you have done a tremendous job with such a minimal staff. I commend all of you. I don't know when you sleep.
and behind you too, Councilmember.
I can honestly tell you that we are part-time, and we're tired.
Yeah.
We're very tired. And we have to make the decisions, but to have this laid out this way, to show us, to prove to us that they are working beyond the means of any other city. And we do have Silicon Valley Power, we have Levi State, we have things that they don't have. So how these people are doing this, I don't know. And the ability to keep them here, I don't know how you're doing that. Maybe some kind of, I don't know what she does, but she keeps you here. And I am eternally grateful. And the fact that she brought on, Lynn, you've been like awesome. I mean, I just was kind of like, wow. An auditor, I mean, something that we've never had before, but I think was really important to the function of the organization. I think you've uncovered a few things that we really need to address and take care of. The risk manager, I just met you yesterday. I mean, these are the kind of things that help the sustainability, that make us stronger, that, you know, so that we can power through a lot more things.
Yeah.
And it's really good to see it all laid out so that our residents understand we have a really good team here. And it's the criticism as it comes, a lot of it unwarranted. But I don't think they understand the impact of how the city operated before, where we hired a manager to come in and get process. So from a goal-setting standpoint of getting us through a 10-year look and what we need now to the people and investing in our people is a strong statement. I mean, it's a goal, and I'm really happy, and I appreciate this, but reading this, last night, I was just amazed. I don't know who put this together, Kendra. Did you put this together? It was excellent. I mean, it was laid out so that I could understand the impacts that we have. So I appreciate everything you've done.
Good.
I just want to comment.
Please.
I could have been clearer in open, and I just completely forgot, is I want for us to think as our workforce, there's obviously the delivery of service and the transactions that they have with the residents. We know those are measured very highly. That's our good fortune. We have to think through about their emotional and physical needs, because the council report writing, Councilmember O'Neill brings up a very good, we've looked at how we can streamline, how we can create less burden on producing these reports. We meet on Tuesday, we get out when you get out, and immediately on Wednesday, because we have meetings each week, we are not an organization that's built for meetings each week. What it takes is employees coming to work the next day, bright early in the morning, finishing those 44 reports that go in the packet, going into production through the clerk's office on Thursday and Friday, because our Granicus system is clunky and it takes time, and we have to do reruns to make sure everything is in there, this packet included, and producing it on Friday. Friday, we go into PowerPoint mode, and over the weekend, we're all doing the PowerPoints, and sometimes there's 10 PowerPoints for your Tuesday meeting that the attorney has to go through, the manager, the finance director, obviously staff in the manager's office, and in back of you are the producers, and then we're still closing up referrals in the meantime. That's important to share because that is what we have to fix. It is not sustainable. It is, frankly, a high-risk category. I mentioned at our governance session that I am concerned. People are missing lunches. They're working all weekend. They're not flexing their hours. That creates risk as the employer, and we need to be real about that because that's part of the work plan.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, other council members? Councilmember Watanabe?
Thank you. And thank you for the report, Deanna. It is overwhelming what you've just presented to us, but it is a lot to absorb. But at the same time, you know, based on what you presented to us last year, I would have to say that it, you know, in layman's terms, I mean, it definitely comes across. I think it's a lot better to understand the position that the city is in. So, and you've obviously put a lot of time into making sure that, you know, we can understand and going forward, you know, the needs of the city and your challenges, and which reflect then on, you know, what our city is going through.
to Councilmember Davis's comment about being a part-time employee, councilperson, I take exception to that because I think in many cases, we're really not part-time. I know, I know, well, I'm just going to just, just state that, I mean, I think every one of us and maybe our new council members will find this out, that really our job, really, it's not part-time. It is a full-time job. And people ask me that sometimes they say, are you working part-time? And I say, no, I say I have a full-time, part-time job. Right. And so, because really, we are, we are, but I think at the same time too, I think it's a reflection on how our city is being more transparent, and people feel like they can reach out to us at all times of the day, right. and to keep the discussion going and to find things out. So, and I think that's really important. Just recently, I had a comment from a resident out on Nextdoor just saying about how they had never seen the openness and transparency from an elected official that they have seen just in me expressing information that you have shared with us, or public services, have shared with us, and just putting the information out there to make our community feel safe and feel like they're being heard. So, and I thought that was a really important testimony, to receive back, that people are feeling that and recognizing that. One question, I know a lot of discussion has been focused on, the gaps in employment and the staff levels, but I don't know if this has been considered at all, possibly, that in order to fill the gaps right now until we're in a position to permanently fill them, has the city explored like using consultants? And because I'll tell you right now, my husband was just found out about a week ago that he's being laid off as of next Friday. And so, and I'm sure he's not the only one, in the engineering field or out in the high-tech area, that there's probably a lot of institutional knowledge out there that we could probably capitalize on to, bring into the organization, maybe to fill, like I said, to fill those gaps temporarily until we're in a position to fully find the right person to permanently take the spot. And it looks like you're going to say something.
Sure. So
yes.
Our data tells a story, and we obviously can see what the conclusions are, but also signals what the solutions are. And that's the good part of this data. We need to look at, through our budget cycle, a professional development or training allocation on a one-time basis, because that's where our funding is more discretionary, to really begin to infuse training and work at staff. It's work webinars, it's really targeted how we skill build.
Yeah.
We also need to look at what I'm coining as a turn the corner fund, where we acknowledge that our website, no staffing, an assignment that was given without any staffing, it's going to take some infusion of one-time consultants, part-time staff, in order to just get it done and allow for us to move on to other assignments. In other areas, there's the same Public Records Act. Maybe bring in some part-time staff for a limited period of time, help us with implementing the software that we've procured, that we cannot pull staff away to respond. Included in your packet, I'm sure you've seen the horizontal stacked diagrams. We need to be disciplined around those work plans and understand that when we have the referrals or have new initiatives, it impacts those work plans, some of which are how we have legal commitments for turnaround times. And we need to be honest around those conversations and not pretend that we have resources. This council has been incredible with allowing for us to even raise those issues. And so we've now presented the work plan so that we begin to infuse it as an institutional practice. I also want to get back to conventional workplace practices that allow for us to recruit more. The scenario that I just explained, I'm sure our new employees are over there going, oh my God, what did I sign up for, right? You didn't tell me this part, Deanna.
What did I sign up for?
But people need to know that when they work here, there's opportunities to flex when they've put in their hours for the week. There's opportunities to not have to work every weekend or miss a lunch, right? And those are realities of being a conventional workplace. I've had many positions. I've never seen it like this where that high risk exists. And I just want to acknowledge, as my opening comment that Sean relayed, that it comes from the governance to establish the foundation for effective change. The fact that I'm here and able to present this data to you as the council and not feel at risk either for the executive leadership team or for myself is incredible progress. There's councils that staff could never do this, and you allow for us to raise it, and that's the beginning of the trust and the dialogue.
Very good.
Well, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to respond as well to the idea of, making up for the crunches with consultants. And I think there's kind of 2 points I'd like to make. One is that now that we're doing a lot, when I came here, there was not a lot of, let's say, competitive procurement of consultants. We're now much more regularly going through a process to hire consultants to have transparency and competition around bringing them on, and so that's a process that we now have, and I'm not sure that comparing that process and that effort to the recruitment process is really, you're devoting resources just to even obtaining the consultant, and then secondarily. I want to put this diplomatically, but the consultants don't protect the city the way a full-time career employee or official does. I mean, I saw that with the way the stadium documents were negotiated. Some of them are not very good at all in terms of having protected the city and the stadium authority, and I really think you get your best bang for your buck and the overall value, and haste can make waste, and I think when you have a dedicated workforce that really knows the city, that doesn't have to be brought up to speed, in a temporary hiring like a consultant, you do better overall. And so I think that while we can hire consultants strategically to assist us with special projects, I think as a long-term solution, even to get through a short-term period, I just don't think it's necessarily the answer.
Yeah, no, I agree. Depending, on the nature of the task, definitely, if you're dealing with legal documents, you definitely want somebody that's more engaged and you don't have to train and you want somebody that's been on board. I totally understand and agree. But, in the meantime, with in other areas, where it can, just temporarily fill a gap, somebody that doesn't have to be as trained, that could be that supplement. But I totally agree as well. The webinars, the continual education, very important, to maintaining, the staff. And I have to say, in the short time that I've been here, one of the things I've noticed and acknowledged is how many employees do stay here a long time. And I think that's a reflection on, how they feel about working for the city of Santa Clara. And I think going forward, that's going to continue. And it's also a reflection of the management that we currently have, and we'll just continue to make things better here in the city of Santa Clara. So thank you for all that you do, everybody, all the staff. Thank you for all just always being available and being able to help us do our job. And so I want you to know you are appreciated. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let me open it up. Vice Mayor?
I think we know for a long time that our departments have been understaffed and our employees have been underworked for a very long time. And it just seems like every time we try to take steps to improve that situation and correct it, some outside external force really just adversely affects our efforts. Like first it was, the recession after 9/11 and, huge shortfalls in our budget and having to spend down our reserves. And then we recover from this. And then there was the 2008 Great Recession, which has been a very long recovery. It's just been in recent times that we've started to come out from that. And then we get hit with the dissolution of RDA, and we lose significant revenue streams and sources of income that were particular to our city. And so it's been largely a budgetary problem. And I really appreciate this data because it does show the challenges and the reality of what we're dealing with and how far we've fallen behind, and not always from internal reasons, but like I say, there's been some pretty significant external causes that put us in the situation we're here right now, and I really applaud our staff efforts especially led by the executive team, in leading us out of this situation. It's still going to take some time, but in keeping with the alliteration of process, people, and performance, I realize we're focusing on people right now, and this data does tell the story, and I think it is going to allow us to see that way forward to increase that people capacity, which we so absolutely need. But the next fourth word's going to be place, because we also don't have the physical capacity to meet this growth that we need. Okay. It's one thing to hire more personnel in HR or attorney's department or electric, but we need places to put them where they can work effectively and efficiently also. Yeah. So they're going to go hand in hand, but it's something I think we also can't ignore, is we need the right places to put the people. We need more space, and we need the kind of space that's going to accommodate the sort of technology that we all need. I mean, when we look at our central library that has all the cabling in the floors that you can lift up and get to the cabling and all that stuff, and you get that kind of infrastructure built in, that's the kind of city hall we're going to need too. Good. So just one more thing too. No, we need to do that.
Do you want to comment?
I do, and one idea that I've had, absolutely, even if we were to have, the 100 FTEs or 5, we don't know where to place them. We are converting records rooms into multiple office spaces downstairs. I'm happy to show you guys because it's great space, although it lacks a window. The one area that I think is a quick win is converting our cafeteria and making it employee friendly to rest in and be in. You look at some of the spaces where our private sector workforce has to just convene and have teaming, and making it a little spruced up and inviting for people to go in, thinking about the emotional and physical part of employees when they get to rest. That's a huge opportunity for us on site here to spruce it up a little bit and show our employees how you rest and where you rest in place matters.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I appreciate the question because I had the same thought about our one-time situations. Can we contract out these one-time jobs? Also, I think if we update and as we make things more user-friendly and as we put more records out and are more open with our data, I think that the public records request could take care of itself, because I've been kind of horrified by what staff is required to do for that. And to me, council should have a priority to upgrade our records and make that as user-friendly, not just for staff, but for the public, so we are not overusing our time in that way. And I'd like to see that as we talk about our physical space, also our technology realities.
Very good. Excellent. Very good. Councilmember Shahal.
Thank you. So thank you for the data, right? There's a reason that data analysis is one of the top profession being sought and top highly paid. And this data gives us not only the future, what we did in the past, what we plan to do in the future. So thanks a lot for all this data crunching. And I do have, like other council members and the mayor, it's a great job what we did in the last 1 year where we are, and we are just learning, me and Councilmember Karen Hardy, we are getting up to speed on that. But I do have a couple of questions and some comments about some of the slides we had. Slides number 10 was about full-time equivalent per capita statistics with comparison to different cities. So I would like to see down the line, not today, not tomorrow, some statistics based on the budgeting, like per capita budget. Like every city has a different general fund budget, and how are we doing on that for our staff and salary staff and retirement benefits? What percentage of our budget is going towards that? Because at the end of the, after we prepare our budget, finance is the one thing which can provide the services versus what we are spending on the management part of it, because whatever left is going into the investment of the community. If we are top-heavy into the management spending, we are left with less on that. So I would like to see some numbers related to that budget part of it, how much we are spending on those. That's one thing. And one subjective thing, which slide number 15 was about the high-risk, low-trust quadrant we are in. So I understand the high-risk part of it. And as you know, trust is one factor which is very, very important for the community, for the leadership, for the employees as such. And I would like to see why we are quantitatively like defining why we are at a low trust level. And if we are at a low trust level in that quadrant, what we can do to improve that, what are our solutions to bring that level to high trust, so that at the end of the day, the residents have to trust all of us sitting over here. And if we increase that trust level, even if we make mistakes, they will still trust us. Oh, it was a genuine mistake, and we still trust them.
Yes.
Whereas if we are at a low trust, even if we do very well, they may not perceive what's going on. So I would like to find out the reasons why we are at low trust level and what are the solutions for getting at the high trust level.
Good, excellent.
Can I say something also?
Please, and then we'll go to Brian.
Up. I just want to follow up on what Councilmember Chahal has just said. I think at the end of the day, and I've seen such an improvement because, as Councilmember O'Neill just said to me, hey, you read Nextdoor, you read Facebook, you read Twitter, you start to see a little bit about how your community is reacting to your city and how we operate. And I see just by my observation that we've done a lot better in terms of a community trust level in the last year. However, we can always do better. And I just wanted to say, keep in mind through this next couple of days that communication is the key for us, because as we have seen, we can do all these wonderful things, but if we don't effectively communicate what we're doing or respond back to all the false information out there, if we don't respond effectively and communicate effectively, all the things that we're doing, it won't matter in terms of trust with our community. So I think that should be an overarching, I'm going to keep talking about this overarching goal of effective communications, where I think we can do a lot better. So, so I just wanted to say that, Councilmember Chahal, we've come leaps and bounds in terms of the trust level with the community, but we still have a ways to go. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
Thank you, thank you, Mayor.
I had a response, actually.
Yes,
so, and this is coming from the fact that I'm not only a city attorney, I'm also a resident, and so I really hear what people are saying that my fellow residents say to me. And I think some of the reason, and I'm not going to attribute all of it, but I think some of the reason for the trust issue being there is that I don't think there's any denial of the fact that we have offloaded certain responsibilities through contract, for example, the whole stadium management issue, the convention center management issue, to third parties that have been, I'm just going to be honest about it, vehemently resisted giving us the information that we need to provide to the public. And I have been, for example, with the stadium management company, been dealing with litigation that they filed to resist giving us information since the day I got here. And I've been trying to get that information. But when we can't get the information from the people who are managing the public asset, how can we expect the public to trust us that we're able to provide them with the information that they're asking for? And it's difficult, and I think we've all acknowledged that the city does not have a good history of contract management. We acknowledge that, this is fabulous that we now have a city auditor that knows how to audit and is actually performing an audit function. So these are important changes that we're making. I think we recognize, when we say we're in a low trust environment, I don't think we're trying to say that we're not trustworthy. I think we're trying to say we are trustworthy. We're doing the best we can with what we have and the historical relationships that we've had. We're trying to improve those relationships, and we're trying to bring those other people on board with helping us get our community to trust that we are getting the true picture of what's going on here.
Good, excellent.
I just wanted to add that low trust environment is very common in organizations, just putting my organization development cap on, where you're trying to drive change. And getting buy-in from employees around why the change is going to bring about certain outcomes that the council establishes is a key element that any person driving change needs to understand. That means, my Friday in the Field example and my initiative for 2019, that means we need to deploy ourselves so that employees have front access to ask me questions. And it was actually at the at CDD and my time working at the permit counter where our staff was saying, we're not getting this Granicus thing yet. We're still smoothing out details, not working as easy for me. They need to be able to feel trust that they can tell me that, and then I translate that to you. So that's what I meant by low trust in terms of you're charging me as the city manager to drive an incredible amount of change, and I have to have the employees there hand in hand with me, buying into it, and it comes with being with them and engaging with them. The other is, Brian used one example, we've had some real blunders in front of the council, and I feel upset sometimes when I share a provision of any agreement, not just the stadium agreement, and the council says, I didn't know about that, or we were never told about that. There have been so many times when we get information and put it before the council, and you're making a decision, and it existed institutionally, and yet it was never before the council. Those are things that are important for us to acknowledge, that each one of those examples takes from our building of trust as we go forward. And frankly, that's really not acceptable as a way to interact, right? It degrades the council manager and council staff relationship. The last is our relationship with the community, so workforce, council, and our community. I think a great example is the community grants program. Streamlining opportunity requires more process improvement. Of course, we piloted it out, it's months old. But what we read about is it was as if it came with an intention of doing harm. And it's a trust issue, right? That means we have to spend time working with the users, understanding what streamlining is important for them, build the trust that we want to make the change, and then deliver to the council to drive that change. I think, each one of those presents incidences or examples that degrade trust. And I have to be front and center of that because I need that trust from each one of those components to deliver and be effective.
Okay, excellent.
And keying off of what Deanna just said, I think it's important for the community to understand that both Deanna and I have come here, as well as Lynn, within the last 2 years. And I don't think the community is aware of the lack of transition of any information to us when we came in. I mean, I got virtually no information when I got here. I haven't found any information that existed prior to me being here. The two previous city managers to Deanna did not provide any transition of information to her when she came on, and poor Lynn here had no information to be transferred. So we're coming in here with somewhat of a blank slate, but there is history that we just don't know about, and so that also adds to the uncertainty, and I think creates a little bit of lack of trust as well. So I think I'm hoping that the community can understand that they can trust us, but we are in the environment of being in in a situation where we're not sure of what we can trust in terms of the history of where the city's been. So we're doing the best we can, and we're trying to be as open about it as we can, and we're hoping that we can continue that trust building. And we want to hear from people if they feel we're not.
Good, excellent.
Thank you. With that, like, you have been here 2 years. I'm not here even 2 months. So I have a lot to learn from that perspective, right? And when I said trust overall, I was not trying to finger point towards any as an individual. I'm basically thinking from a much broader perspective as an organization point of view. I'm not trying to finger point that. Like, my idea was from the organization point of view, from the leadership point of view, basically.
Very good.
That was my idea. And if I may, please.
Yes.
I had some comments on the legislative part of it, like city trying to find out a full-time employee or something for the legislative point. I think we should, that's just a comment, and we should look at some of the non-profit organizations which are helping us in this context more deeply, like California League of Cities, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and other stuff who are almost in the same boat where we are on that. So that can be one solution towards that. And one last, as Mayor rightly mentioned, the communication part. That is very key, important part of what we deliver, what we get, and how we disseminate the information to the public. And one thing which is on slide number 43, basically community engagement. We are trying to do what our best we are trying to do as an organization, as a staff from that point of view. I think we are missing some part of it at the ground level. Like so many of our development plans have gone through different community engagements, and I think the percentage of people who are coming to attend those or responding to those is pretty low. And I'm not trying to blame anybody over here. Our residents are also not taking that much interest because we have a very part of reason is city is well managed and we have a good services, and they are not looking at what we can do better basically in the long run. And there are some issues which are hot issues which attract some people. But how can we engage those residents at that level? That's one thing I would try to emphasize, what we can do to engage that ordinary resident into our decision-making process.
Yeah, very good. Excellent.
I think an area that presents a real opportunity is the use of technology and banking on our CRM and our online surveys, facilitating receiving their input in a way that is convenient for them. I often look at, and I guess I would say, first of all, this is a really extremely engaged community. Having worked in surrounding cities, much larger and also relatively the same size, I am amazed. I came here and I go, this is a very vibrant community. That's great. So I think it's all within context, right, in terms of we want more engagement. But you look at San Jose and Oakland, and from at least from my perspective, I know, the same thing, and it was by far less. But our just like people are changing to 24/7 services with purchasing groceries and banking and things like that, we need to provide them access where quickly they can provide us their input, and it helps inform us. There's likely people are working, they're dealing with kids, they're dealing with it, and it's just not convenient each time to come and sit in a room and engage. So we have to be out there saying, how do we make it easier for them?
And last but not the least, we have created some new positions like the procurement and other stuff. I would say it is a good idea to emphasize down the line, hey, hiring this position, we spent X dollars, but at the same time, this is what we saved in a particular contract. If we, that historical financial data would really help us down the line. We are investing in these processes, but we are at the same time, we are saving in financial terms in the long run by saving on those different projects or different bids and et cetera. That's one other comment.
I enjoy the ability to try to quantify that. I think I've established, I love this data. It tells us stories. What's important, though, is the positions that we established are intended to fill an absolute gap that we noticed. If you were here last year or tuned in, we didn't have a procurement mechanism to even make sure that we had best practices and modern practices. And legally, it presented a high risk. I use the example on risk management that there was no one place where you could go and just say, this is the universe of risk for Santa Clara, and we now have a resource in place, understaffed, albeit, but we have a resource in place with someone who's thinking about that for us and going to help us get some order and a work plan in place. Contracts management, I was dismayed one day. We got a Public Records Act request, and it was to certain targeted cities, and it was give us a printout of all of your contracts for blah, 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 blah. We don't even have a system that can produce a printout because all of them are in paper throughout the organization. People have created maybe an Excel spreadsheet. We have some information in our clerk's office, but we're curing for the absence and void of before, and we've got to get that done before we can get to metrics.
Thank you. Anything else from council from what you've heard so far? Oh, yes, please.
I wanted to also make some comments on the community engagement piece because if I recall, it was 2 years ago when we had the goal setting session, 2 years, and I was sitting on the other side in the audience, and myself and many people from the public were hammering on community engagement. And I know at that time there was a lot of lack of trust in our city hall 2 years ago. So it's good to see the data that Deanna, you've shared with how the city has increased or at least made a huge effort at increasing community engagement. I think with that and all the data you provided, from 2016, 8 open city hall to 20 last year, the increase in online following with the e-notify, with the Facebook, with Twitter, and then obviously with the download of the My Santa Clara app. So it's really good to see this data at how the city has really amplified its community engagement process. There is more to do, obviously, with, as Deanna said, engaging with people who are, working really long, hard hours, not being able to come to like a session like this because it's during the workday. Many families working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet in the area. And so you're absolutely right that we have to find ways to reach them in ways that are convenient to them. But seeing this progress is really good to see. On the other hand, it also, because the city is still transforming, as people get a window and see the transformation happening, they see the sausage being made, it may also contribute to their, maybe not lack of trust, but they're seeing the sausage being made and they're seeing the transformation happen. Whereas before, it may have been a complete mess, but because there was no community engagement, there was no communication, nobody really knew about it unless they scratched deep beneath the surface. So it is kind of a double-edged sword because as you engage people and you let people see or get access to see what's going on, people will actually see the sausage being made. They're going to see, and you can see it, 1,300 public records requests, which I know takes a huge toll. Obviously, the city clerk's office is the first responder to those public records requests, so I know it takes a huge toll on them. And then obviously the rest of city staff that has to, compile that information. So it's a great thing to see the community engagement increase. We obviously have more to go, but with that comes also more intense scrutiny from our very engaged community.
Right, exactly. Very good. Okay, let me ask, anything else from what we've heard so far? Let me just make a suggestion here. We're doing great time-wise. Do we need just a 5-minute break? Just a stretch break. So let me make this suggestion. If we can reconvene at 11:30, we'll turn to Brian, to the city attorney, and you can give your presentation, and then that will bring us up to lunch, and then we actually will stay slightly ahead of schedule if we can proceed that way. So I will be the sort of the taskmaster and get everybody reconvened at 11:30. Gives us about 8 minutes or so.
that system.
Okay.
You just have to let them know that they click on CC so they can read at the bottom
Okay.
and watch us.
So I'm telling them to click
Yeah,
on
just say,
CC.
"We just heard, that
Okay.
the city manager."
Get started here, and we'll tee up actually both council appointee presentations from the city attorney and the city auditor, and that will take us to lunch and maybe just a couple minutes after as we open that up for questions from council, but that does put us ahead of schedule. And let me say for the people who are observing from streaming from home, you get closed caption, but you have to click on the CC on your device or on your monitor. Is that correct? Do I have?
Yes, they can follow along.
Perfect. Very good. Okay. So with that said, then, let me turn it over to Brian, to City Attorney Brian Doyle, and walk you through his presentation, and then we'll go directly to the City Auditor, to Lynn, and then we'll open it up for questions. Brian?
Good morning, Mayor, Good morning, Mayor, council members, members of the public, fellow residents. I'm Brian Doyle, the city attorney. As I said before, I've been here 2 years. I'm standing because my chair and my back are not getting along very well. And I think it's a little bit better for me to do it this way. So I'm going to have to hold the microphone to get it close enough. No, this is fine. Well,
Give him the
we can
handheld
move that
one.
microphone
it's a little
over
easier
here.
if we have it.
Or I can go to the podium, too.
You want to do that?
Will I be able to see? Yeah, okay. Okay, very good.
Yeah, that's the next big question. Here, let me do this.
It's on? Okay. I think that works now. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Again, Brian Doyle here, city attorney. First, I'd just like people to realize the capacity or in-house capacity. The city attorney's office has 7 FTEs. We now have actual 5 attorneys, 5 in-house attorneys for the city. I think that although that represents an increase of 1, I think we're still very much understaffed in terms of our capacity to provide in-house services, and I think the city can do a lot better, as I said before, with in-house services. I think what we're going to do is this year we're going to see how we do with the 5 folks that we have, with a lot of some of the administrative burdens being transitioned to more administrative areas of the city. I think we're going to have more capacity to do actual legal work within the office. And so I think we're doing okay on the regard to our internal services. What do we do in the attorney's office? We oversee all claims and all litigation. So to a large extent, our workload is driven by external forces. We rarely sue anybody. Most of our litigation is people suing us. I know we've received some criticism for how much money we spend on litigation. That's because people sue us. It's not because we're suing them. So sometimes it takes a lot of money to get out of that litigation. And most of our litigation work is handled by outside counsel. The good news is we've reduced our outside counsel expenditures substantially this year. And I'm hoping to keep on that trend so that we don't have to spend as much money on outside counsel. In 2018, we had 47 active litigation matters. I heard today that we just served with another one. That's 2019. We had a lot of claims filed. We handled 25 court appearances for municipal code prosecutions. We assisted with administrative appeal hearings. I know Walter does quite a few of those, and we assist him with those hearings. We also do have outside appeals hearing officers. And then a Pichett's motion is going to court, and that's dealing with discovery about our police officers, and we assist the police department with dealing with those. Obviously, the work you know from us firsthand is the legal advice that we provide to the City Council and to the City Manager, the City Departments, as well as the Stadium Authority. And then we have all the boards and commissions that we assist. We prosecute the enforcement of city codes. We defend the city. And then we deal a lot with Public Records Act request responses. And I think we're going to make progress this year in getting some of that work out of our office and into other people's hands. We've had very productive discussions with our brand new records manager, who we love, and we're very happy that she's here now. And so we really think we're going to start making some progress on not having as much of a workload dealing with Public Records Act requests. We provide trainings on relevant areas laws such as the Brown Act and Public Records Act, and we also are providing in-house training on contract procurement, as well as contract writing, as well as contract management. And you know, we're trying to push out trainings to the city staff so that they can have more understanding of how to do these things correctly. Mark Giovanetti is a tremendous resource to the city in getting that done as well. And of course, we have all the legal support that we provide to HR and all the internal employee issues that we deal with in that regard. Our number one accomplishment in 2018 was winning the stadium rent reset arbitration against the 49ers. That was a major victory. The value of that to the city was more than $170 million. It's not new money, but we avoided the loss of that kind of money. And we also just recently got a final ruling from the arbitrator, and we will receive more than $2 million in attorney's fees and costs that we had to expend in again defending that arbitration. That arbitration was triggered by the stadium, by the 49ers stadium company. We obtained dismissals in how many cases is that? That's quite a few cases. And then we also obtained, not on this list, is we also obtained a dismissal from the stadium management company in their case against us, where they were trying to resist getting records from them. We still have a claim against them to obtain records, but at least their lawsuit where they sued us, they voluntarily dismissed us. We got settlements in quite a number of cases, and these were also very important to the city in terms of just disposing of us having to deal with these cases. And then we had two important appellate victories in the Smith case and the Wheeler case. We had a lot of work on both the writing of Measure A, as well as all the districting that we had, all the council district work that we had to do with the districting committee. We worked on Measure M, and we worked on Measure N. And writing legislation, writing an ordinance, or writing a ballot measure is probably one of the most difficult things for a city attorney's office to do. It just really takes a lot of experience and thought whenever you're writing a law, writing a charter amendment, writing a ballot measure, and then explaining that in plain words. And I really do believe it's important that we try to get as understandable a statement of what it is we're asking the public to vote on. And I think it's very important that we write very clear ballot provisions, very clear charter language, and very clear ordinances so the public really knows what it is we're doing. We had numerous ordinances that we worked on. I take a lot of I consider writing ordinances to be a very important part of a city attorney office's work, and I think we have a very good staff that is good at doing this, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve the work product, as well as getting good turnaround times on all these. Our key accomplishments that we worked on were we developed regulations related to commercial cannabis. We worked on many environmental documents, the biggest ones being Tasman East, the Prometheus project on Benton Street, dealing with the Franklin Street easement. We worked on the environmental review for Gateway Crossings and the Agri-Hood project. And we also had a tremendous amount of transactional work that we worked on for the Agri-Hood project as well. That was a very complicated financing, as I said the other night, and I think that was a major amount of work that we were able to accomplish in 2018. I really don't like this statistic, 2,500 legal service requests. These are the little yellow forms that our staff works on. When I came here, we were dealing with getting work by packets of paper with a yellow sheet on top, and everything is a manual process. It still is. We've developed an electronic process to substitute for that so that we can better track that and waste a lot less paper, but that's not quite implemented. We're hoping to get that process in better shape. But that's really getting into the weeds. So upcoming policy issues. You know, the cannabis issue is something that we're going to have to deal with. There's a lot of community interest in what we do and what we will allow and what we won't allow. We will be bringing those forward this year. We have the massage ordinance we're working on. We have a lot of work that we're doing with respect to ADA compliance and transitioning into getting more ADA compliance in the future. We have a lot of work in land use and development. We have the zoning code update, which that's an area that's very near and dear to my heart. I really want to see our zoning ordinance get into a more modern shape and more streamlined processes for the public so that they don't have to go through multiple layers of process to get their projects approved. We also have some very, very significant specific plans that we're working on. The El Camino Real, the downtown specific plan, Patrick Henry, and Freedom Circle. And I know there's a lot of interest by the council and the community in working on those and getting those finalized so that we don't have to go through these one-off general plan amendments, these one-off PD permits and zoning amendments. These are very painful ways of dealing with these major changes to how Santa Clara is going to look in the future. So we're hoping that the public can participate in these specific plan developments, and hopefully we will get good community input at that point and get the solutions that the community is looking for in those specific documents that are much more coordinated so that the different developments are coordinated with each other and with the traffic impacts and the other housing density issues. And then of course, we have the stadium issues, which is also, I can't deny this, the stadium is a major workload for our office. It's a major workload for my time. And when we talked about, you know, who's working on the weekends, who's working in the evenings, who's responding to telephone calls, a lot of times it is related somewhat to the stadium. So the principal, and we have a new issue in the loss of the property taxes over the assessor's recent decision. So the stadium issues will continue to be a major workload, and we will continue to try to make progress. We have more more policy issues that we're working on. You know, we have the Lawrence Area Station, the Kylie project. I'm not really sure where that is in the process. Obviously, the Convention Center management will be coming to you very, very soon. We're working on that. The good news is that both Mark and I have a lot of experience in putting these contracts together, as well as the city manager's office. So I think we're in good shape to get that transition happening. We're assisting the Salary Setting Commission with their work. They're for the first time going to be engaging in their work. And then we have a whole bunch of changes in state law that we have to bring the city up to speed with, and those are all listed here. I think probably some of the biggest ones are going to be the housing issues that the state legislation, the state is attempting to push more and more of its control or place regional control over our decisions about where housing goes. And this is a big issue because housing drives transportation issues, and we don't have control over those transportation issues. We have some input. Thanks to Councilmember O'Neill, we have as much input as we think we can get with VTA and those other issues, but we don't have control over them. And you know, any development causes transportation issues and traffic issues, and we need to try to keep those coordinated, keep housing development, commercial development, and transportation coordinated in a way that we can actually live in Santa Clara. And then again, I've repeated a bunch of other issues that we've talked about. To me, one of the major workload items, and I see the chief in the back there, this change to state law about responding to Public Records Act and video, not just of it's body-worn cameras, but it includes actually all video that the police might be using. It's a tremendous workload for the police department, and it's going to be a fairly decent workload for the city attorney's office to assist the police department in getting it right and making sure we're disclosing what we should disclose and making sure we don't disclose what we're not supposed to disclose. So this is going to be a big effort on our office's part, and we're looking at how we're going to stage that. What are the operational constraints? Again, I feel like I've told people when I came here, I felt like I was pulling the city kicking and screaming out of the 19th century directly into the 21st century because of all the paper that's running around here. And so we're making some great strides in bringing us into the 21st century, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. I think we've starting to solve the problem of the lack of risk management resources, and then thanks to Councilmember Mahan, who has raised the issue of insufficient workspace. I'd love to have more attorneys in-house. I think it is the best bang for the city's buck, but I have no more room to hire any more attorneys, so we'll have to still rely on some outside counsel for some of our work. So those are those issues. So in summary, we'll continue to provide the day-to-day advice. We'll continue to provide the long-term, ongoing major project advice that we do. We're going to assist the city manager's office with the improvements to workflow. We will continue to work on the major projects, City Place, Kylie, Convention Center, Stadium, and hopefully as we improve our business processes with the rest of the city, we will be able to actually do more legal work and less pushing around of paper and finding things. And that's my presentation. If the council has questions or if other folks have questions.
Let's hold on the questions until we hear from the auditor.
Okay, that's fine then.
And
so are you going to go before lunch, or?
No, we're going to work in Lynn right now.
Okay.
Before
Very
lunch.
Good.
So as we queue up for Lynn and the city auditor's report, I do want to point out in your packet and in the public agenda, staff is asking for recommendations from you, and I'll point these out as we progress through the day. But one of them is to approve the city auditor's annual audit work plan for FY 18-19 mid-year and 2019-20. We will do all of this tomorrow afternoon, but as you're listening to her, you can be thinking about whether or not you want to recommend approval of the work plan. It's all yours now, Lynn.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Council, City Manager, City Attorney, and staff and members of the public. My name is Lynn Lamb, and I'm the City Auditor and the Stadium Authority Auditor. I'd like to remind you that our office mission is to promote honest, efficient, effective, and fully accountable city government through accurate, objective, and independent audits. Our mission is to establish performance audits within the organization. Oh, sorry, let me come closer. So our goal is to establish performance audits within the organization so we can better know how our programs really perform when comparing to other agencies. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the background slide. Okay. A little background information as to where we were a year ago versus where we're at today. On June 26, 2018, the council voted to move the position of the city auditor to the finance department and assign the responsibilities to the assistant finance director. The council also voted to expand the duties of the city auditor to conduct in-depth financial and performance audits for the city. These actions corrected the misalignment and governance structure of an elected city clerk serving concurrently as a council appointee. One thing that I do want to point out is that although we had the city auditor position is not new, the audit function itself is new to the city. The city never truly had an internal audit function that really analyzed the business process, your internal controls, or even conduct performance or compliance audit. We never really had a true pre-audit perspective to look at our programs and to ensure that are we in compliance with our agreements, following our policy and procedures. So the audit function at the city has been absent over the years, and it will require additional time to be reintroduced. For our existing resource, we have 3 FTE, and we currently have 1 vacancy that we're working with HR to recruit. We have a contractual service budget of $200,000. That's mainly to help us in outsourcing some of the audit projects due to our limited resource in staffing. We manage the annual financial audit contracts for the city and the stadium authority. We perform financial, operationals, and performance audits for the city. Lastly, we audit and approve all bills, invoices, payrolls, demands, and charges against the city before payment. What you see here is a 90-day observations, my 90-day observations here at the city. This is a high-risk environment. There's a lack of policy and procedures within organizations, and if we actually do have any policy and procedures, we're either not following them or we don't really have anyone there to really monitor for accountability. There is a heavy reliance on decentralized functions, outdated workflows, and a lot of manual processes. This is mainly due to a lack of knowledge in performance management or even program management. So throughout the years, the city has implemented many business processes, many programs, but we never really truly had an independent review of the process to see whether or not are we still following business practice, how are we performing against other agencies. In terms of accomplishment for the last 5 months, we have completed the annual audit work plan for fiscal year 18-19, fiscal year 19-20. The Stadium Authority's audit services RFP has been done. We completed the PAC's campaign disclosure audit, the annual cash disbursement review for fiscal year 17-18. And lastly, one item that I wanted to point out here is we had implemented greater internal controls over the check stock issuance process to include chain of custody. Now, the reason why I actually emphasized this particular item was that it was very interesting when I first came on board and I looked over at the city clerk's office, how are we managing our check stock? Well, there's really no internal controls or whatnot. What you do is you have a staff that comes in that needs to do a check run. They'll just write their name, how many checks they take, and that's it. There's no one there to really manage the whole check stock to go, okay, who's coming? Are the number of checks that you're actually asking for equal the number of checks for that check run or for the payroll process? So since then, we've actually implemented a chain of custody to make sure there's one person that's in charge of the whole check stock. If anybody wants to come in, they have to log in how much, and it does it tie to the whole check run. So I thought that was pretty glaring for me to see. Yeah. So this next slide here is you'll see a very high-level summary of our audit work plan. You can finally find more information into the package that we've included the audit work plan. Of all the projects listed here, I would say the whistleblower hotline is the most exciting project for the city. This will be the very first time that the city offers such hotline for employees to actually call in, report on fraud, waste, and abuse. This hotline will be managed by a third-party provider, I'm sorry. And then internal audit will actually manage any cases that comes in, but employees will have the ability to call in either through a phone or through an online web intake anonymously to make the claim. Now, for this particular project, we've specifically pushed this to April 2020. That's because we're not fully staffed yet, so I'm waiting until we're fully staffed before we roll it out, because I would imagine once we roll out the plan, there's going to be an influx of calls coming in. The next item here that I want to point out is the audit of the vendor master file. So this particular project, I've selected for it to be the very first project for the city auditor's office to work on. This is mainly due to the fact that accounts payable fraud often starts with the creation of a fictitious vendor. And this is the #1 method that people use to defraud companies. Considering the fact that we've never had an internal audit functions or anyone has ever looked at the vendor master file, I specifically scoped this item to be the very first audit that we're concentrating on. In addition to the audit, we will be conducting reviews of financial procedures and controls for the Stadium Authority relating to the non-NFL events revenues, their financial reporting policy, and reviewing past transactions relating to the construction fund and public safety costs. The next item that I want to point out is the citywide fraud risk assessment. This is the most important project of all for the city itself, because we've never really had a fraud risk assessment for all of the city departments. So this particular project will be outsourced to a third party, through an external audit firm to kind of look at, review all of the business process within the city departments, identify where are the risky areas, and then work with us to figure out what's a better place, how to implement better internal controls to mitigate this risk. So in terms of deliverables, going forward, the council will receive an annual audit work plan, an annual audit recommendation status report. What that is, on #2, what that is as we move forward with our audits and we have recommendations, we will continue to track all of the recommendations on the spreadsheets and then provide an annual status as to where they are, have they implemented or not, and what's the status of it. The third item is a semi-annual audit status report, which we will provide to council, kind of like a status update on where we're at with the annual audit work plan. We will provide completed audit reports, as well as the report on the whistleblower hotline, as we have more information down the line. In summary, we will continue to reintroduce an audit function, establish a whistleblower hotline for fraud, waste, and abuse, carry out the projects in the audit work plan, recruit and train audit staff, and lastly is to promote greater accountability.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Lynn. For council, we're open up for questions and discussion. We can start with Councilmember Davis.
I don't have a question. I have a thank you. Thank you, thank you. When you first were hired and you came in and you sat down with me and you addressed every issue that came. Why is this happening? Why is this? We just didn't have you. But now that we have you, I think we're going to have a source of, let's just say, where's the money going? Where has it been? What's been happening? Because we look at revenue streams. We might even have in-house revenue streams that we can work with now. So it was really scary that when Deanna was hired, the first thing I told her was, audit everybody. I don't care who it is, just do it, because there was no control here, none. It was willy-nilly. And Brian, space-wise, you said that you're going to work with your existing staff now, but is it something we can talk about for you just with space, but do you need to have that other FTE to help you get through? Because what you gave us is a list of things. You've got the stadium is taking a lot of your time. So do we need to have like another person on board? I mean, that's your judgment, your decision that you have to work out. But I really think that we really need to take a look at that if things are more coming at us. You brought up the new policy of their property tax reduction and how that's going to impact us, but not, and the other agencies that do impact us. I mean, I know that there are some funding that we give to the school district. So I really want to compile what is at, I think Walter told me it was like $600,000 impact going forward, but is there more coming? I mean, I really don't know. I mean, it just landed on us, so I really wanted to have an in-depth thing. But do we need to have another body working just solely with you on the stadium?
At this point, I don't think we need that. I think we have
Okay.
a pretty, well, in the case of the stadium, we have a fairly good resource in terms of our outside counsel that's really very familiar with the whole, with how all the contracts work. So at that, not for that, but you know, the subject has come up of the whole real estate. We have a very big real estate portfolio, and we have not managed it very well at all. We're just learning what are all the different leases and how do they, you know, when do they, we don't have a database of what are the leases, when do they come up, what are the triggers for escalation, what, you know, are we properly, are we getting the right revenue for the property that we lease out? Are we making the right decisions in time for if we have a way of getting out of some of these leases? It's just a complete unknown. And at the point that we reach where we're ready to start understanding what's there and maybe doing something different with the real estate, I would like to look at maybe bringing on an in-house resource for just for real estate issues. But we're not there yet. And I would think within this fiscal year, I'll come up with a proposal whether or not we should go with another FTE for next fiscal year.
So, okay, so city manager, with that being said, is that part of tomorrow that we can talk about that real estate management type thing?
I was going to raise it as part of the council priorities. And I have a solution in terms of an approach.
Okay.
I'm happy to take more resources for Stadium Authority that Brian is declining, particularly because every deployment for an event at the Levi Stadium is a multi-department deployment. And the chain starts obviously on the field with the event itself, leading to the administrative process and the closeout and all the work that goes through finance and obviously comes into the manager's office. What is an obvious area that is, and we'll talk about it in the March timeframe, is all of the departments have their tasks. What we're missing is a cohesive deployment strategy where the neighborhoods are addressed, we're tracking that information. We thought, I can honestly say, that we would have sufficient resources in-house between collateral duty, between Walter and I, and our assistant to the city manager who's charged with that. However, the longstanding years of not having oversight from the Stadium Authority Executive Director's Office is largely what we're spending our time on in terms of knowing those agreements, enforcing them, and having reasonable oversight. So it's left us with a really big gap in terms of cohesive strategy that is responsive to the neighborhood. I'm not saying staff isn't doing a good job. From a department's perspective, they are dealing with what they can through their resources, but understanding how that all connects and where there's leveraging opportunities, we don't have a resource in-house that can take that on.
Okay, and then my next question, Lynn, you have a $200,000 budget? Okay, I'm thinking that's a very small number for what you want to accomplish, especially with not having a benchmark. You're starting at ground zero almost and rebuilding a department that was non-existent. So I'm going to question that and say we need to look at that number and do a little bit more due diligence, I think, on that. I think I would rather be a little bit more aggressive because I think there are things that I always say, every time we peel back that onion, there's that layer that you're just going to come across. And our staff, it's always happened that way. Mm-hmm. You know, if we ask for something, they say, oh, well, we peeled this back and this kind of happened. And it's almost like a drive-by. It's like we don't know what's going to happen. And then it's more work. Mm-hmm. So I would rather give you the resources now while we're talking about goal setting to help you. And sorry, Brian, but she's going to take your FTE.
Very good. Mayor Gilmore? Unless you...
yeah, to answer that, we are looking at, that is what's been approved for the budget year 18-19. As we move towards completing the projects and outsourcing some of them, we are looking at just making it a permanent contractual service budget and then potentially increasing that. But so you eventually see that come through.
Excellent. Very good. Mayor Gilmore.
Thank you. I first wanted to respond to the city attorney's presentation. Thank you very much. You did leave out that you helped create the first ever dark money ordinance in the United States. So you've done so much, you forgot about that one. So thank you for that. Also, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your comment about, not using outside contractors or outside law firms. I think that the case where you talked about the fact that we have a huge real estate portfolio and that it may, be necessary for the management of the real estate assets in the city. And I know we have a new contracts manager on, and that will be helpful too. But I think we're probably not unique in other public agencies that we may do these transactions on our properties, but then there is no management of it in, going forward. We don't have a property management type function here, and that is huge lost financial potential financial opportunities for the city where increases are supposed to happen annually. They don't happen because somebody's not reading a contract, or the city ends up providing services to manage the real estate when it's the responsibility of a tenant, and so it's just so much, it's so important financially that we get the real estate under control. And because we have so many real estate related issues, having an attorney in the office that focuses on that, I think, is something that we should consider and be very prudent in providing that. There's other situations that require subject matter experts, and there's other situations where I'm sure in your judgment that it makes more sense to hire an outside counsel, such as we did with the stadium arbitration. The outside counsel that were experts in this, and of course that was a huge windfall for the city afterwards. It paid off by hiring these subject matter experts. So I think we rely on both you and the city manager's discretion as to when it's appropriate and makes sense to hire the outside contractors and consultants versus what you have available here in the city.
And just one comment on hiring outside counsel. One of the biggest issues we have is that every time we hire outside counsel, they have to do a conflicts check. And so, especially with real estate attorneys, most of the people who are experts in real estate may well represent the other side already. So we have to be really judicious in how we do that in terms of that particular type of subject matter expertise. And I do think ultimately the city will benefit if we can get an internal person. I just want to start working. I just took a new person on about 6 months ago. We do have the space constraints. I'm going to try to see what I can do in terms of working with the staff that we have to try to get some expertise there. I'm a big believer in training and bringing people along. And just one more comment. You can have subject matter experts that are in private firms, but there's something unique about being a municipal lawyer that you get an expertise not just in the subject matter area of the real estate, but in all the other issues that we deal with, that you deal with every day, the Brown Act, unique issues like, can you contract away legislative authority? Can I contract away future legislative decisions? I mean, these are all areas that it really helps to have someone who is not only an expert in real estate or contract law, but really an expert in municipal law, because it truly is its own area of expertise. And to the extent you can build up an expertise in-house on those particular areas that you really need in-house expertise, you're doing much better than if you try to do a contract with an outside firm.
I agree, but let's say you have a situation where you're putting a major development on a landfill. Like, it doesn't happen very often, right? Like, oh, Santa Clara, like City Place, right? When you have, that kind of expertise that is needed, that we don't necessarily have someone in-house, that will be able to do that. I see definitely there's certain situations.
Luckily in that area, we do have outside counsel that is on top of a lot of those issues. So
exactly, and that was a case.
That's working well.
A case for that. So thank you. And then going to our city auditor. Well, thank you very much for pulling the Band-Aid off so quickly this morning. I think many of the things that you have pointed out to us. I think some of us have sensed that it was happening, but we had no information about it. So I think that this is probably one of the best things we've done in the last year is to hire you to come in and look at that and talk about potential revenue generator. This is going to be a huge revenue generator for us, just to see how we're operating, the lack of internal controls. I mean, I know we talked earlier about not being in denial about what's happening, and the city manager had said something about, you know, where we have problems, we're putting them out there and talking about how we're going to solve them. Our internal controls have been a huge problem for a long time. And I think that now getting this data and this information is going to help us run a much better organization and a much better city for our residents. So it's shocking what you're telling us, but
That's just one of many.
you threw the cold water on us. We're awake now, and we're going to be very interested in your findings. Very, very interested in your findings. So thank you very much.
Very good. Other comments? We'll go to Councilmember Hardy.
Brian, you mentioned pitch this motion. I don't know what that is. Is that specific? Is that a name to it?
Yeah, it comes from a case where the name of the party involved was Pitchus, and it involves obtaining when defendants, criminal defendants, are being prosecuted. They oftentimes seek information about the police officers who arrested them in an effort to, defend their case, and it's past information, and so there's a process by which they can go to court and seek to get that information. And our attorneys, because we represent the police department, go into court and try to make sure they don't get more information than the law entitles them to.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Also, I hear a continuing. We are rich in assets as far as land. We are somewhat strapped financially and have many encumbrances. And I was trying to do a search. I finally had to ask Vice Mayor Mahan, this building was built in the 60s. And I'm wondering if we need to really look at a long-term plan to do something better for our employees, for our residents, because we do have that land, even to the south of us, on the same piece of property. I'm wondering if we can solve a lot of those problems instead of piecemealing. I think it's something we need to think about.
Later on in the presentation, we do have a City Hall master plan as an area that we need to explore. So we're excited to talk about it.
The city manager was smiling when you made that comment.
Elected officials normally don't like to talk about that, though. So this will be an interesting conversation.
That's right. Everything all done? Yep. Councilmember O'Neill.
Okay, well, just to make a comment on that. In recent years, there have been several thoughts about, building a new city hall or whatever, and possibly moving it downtown. So there's been, lots of discussion. So first of all, I'd like to go back and thank both of you for the very informative presentations. So, City Attorney, one of the things you mentioned was the municipal code prosecutions. So one of the things that, as I guess a soon-to-be former member of the NERC committee and some other of the committees that I'm on, is that some of our residents will say, well, the city never does anything about it. It's not just the neighborhood around the university, but like if people are violating municipal codes, like if their yards are really trashy, or I've known people, friends who had neighbors where there were weeds growing out of their roofs, or with some of the behavior. So are we actually kind of prosecuting these violators of our municipal codes?
Well, the city attorney's office doesn't issue citations for infractions or misdemeanors. It's largely code enforcement, sometimes the police. So every time, every time they issue a citation, will appear. But so I think that the issue of how to gain compliance with city codes is really a larger issue than just is the attorney's office doing something. Generally speaking, criminal prosecutions are really not the best way to obtain compliance. Sometimes that's the last resort where you have to hit somebody over the head with that. But the agencies of the city that issue criminal citations either for infractions or misdemeanors, and I suppose occasionally felonies, would be the police department, the fire department, and code enforcement. So, so I think that would be a different area to talk about that issue in terms of how the community is responding to general code enforcement issues.
Right, because I mean, so the planning, because I mean, I hear that repeatedly, to folks like you're not enforcing, I keep my yard picked up, I do this or that, and or like some of the issues. So code enforcement, they are responsible then they issue the citation, and then they are responsible for receiving the payment.
Yeah, and then we also have administrative citations, which generally speaking we don't really get involved with. But so what you see is what happens in court. Those were the statistics that we presented. What goes on in court. We also have administrative citations that the attorney's office doesn't really get too much involved with, and that happens independently. So hopefully, if those questions are, if you still want those answers, I think that maybe the city manager could have code enforcement respond to those issues.
Okay, and I just wanted to, right, not now, okay. So then also, I was very interested in the issues that you brought up, and I've been hearing already things in the press and on the radio and things about some of the changes in the law regarding like dash cam and body cam, and even the personnel files of some of our public safety folks. So it sounds like there's already cases or things that are happening, like, like I was hearing, like I said, things on the radio just this week. So we're going to have like a protocol or something do we have to define that, or does the law define like what we do if somebody's requesting personnel records, which most of the time, the council is not privy, even if there's been some kind of action, we're not privy to any of those things. So now those personnel files will be subject to release?
I don't really want to get into too much detail. Our office just met with the police command staff and the appropriate people in their records management and records response, as well as with our new records manager on just this issue. So I think both the chief and I share a daunting response to what's happening to us from Sacramento on this area. A lot of times legislatures institute changes and they don't think about what the impact is going to be on local government. I think we've experienced that many times here in Santa Clara, and so we're victim to the state legislature's framing of this issue. And I mean, some of these goals are worthy goals. The public does deserve a certain level of transparency as to what law enforcement's doing in California. But what's happened, I think, with regard to this particular issue, especially the video, is the technology has so far gone beyond what we're ready for in terms of responding. There's so much more video out there. And no one thinks about, okay, well, what is it going to take to review all this video to determine what should be disclosed and what shouldn't be disclosed and when? And it's some of this, and there's all kinds of privacy aspects that are relevant. For example, the police officer goes into a home where there's abuse going on, and the body cam is running. So you have the face of the victim, you have the face of the children, you have the face of the suspect. what gets blocked out, what does he address, there's all these issues, and we're just dealing with it now. So the only reason that we're really bringing it up in our presentation, and perhaps the chief will bring it up in his, is to give the council and the community an understanding of the level of resources it's going to take just to comply with the new state law.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Lynn, thank you very much for your presentation also, and you have a history of being kind of interested in these kinds of issues. But my one question is, why would check stock be being issued to individual employees? And it would seem like that Angie's finance group should be that all requests for cutting a check should go through her controls. And I don't, even if you're, so now you have a process where you're logging who's got them. I mean, why would anybody even be allowed to take a blank check from the city? I mean, it seems like I said, that Angie should be controlling every check that comes out, I would think.
So believe it or not, that was the function that the former city auditor took over. So a lot of the things that I even looked at the business process, it's kind of mind-blowing. You almost cherry pick what you want to stamp your name next to, kind of. That, you're right, in terms of the check cutting process should really relies within finance, where they should have proper controls in place, because they've gone through the normal reviews, approving the whole AP process, and then having an independent source to kind of do the whole check log. So why does the former city auditor would have to actually put their hands in? And well, it's okay if you want to actually implement that piece, but you have to go all the way and put proper controls in place. You can't just have a log there for employees to just log in how many checks they take to print. Even if you lock that in a vault, it doesn't matter, because the vault can be open. All you have to do is just sign your name.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Other comments from council, questions? Oh, please jump in.
I just want to acknowledge that I am so excited about the city auditor and her willingness to go under the hood and bring forward these issues. I think you have seen it from another angle in terms of open access to checkbooks and administrative practices that we had in place before. And so I actually think it's just, the institution begins to shape the work processes. And without having the guards of the city auditor, you can have those approaches to process. And I don't think there's an intentful discussion, intentful statement around there was bad intent. It just happened over time, and we're catching them, and we've got to put them in place.
Very good. And we did talk about trust earlier. It just sounds to me like this is a way of rebuilding trust with the role of the city auditor. Councilmember Watanabe.
Thank you. Well, I was just going to bring up, what happened in a city near us, in the last year. There was an incident where there were no controls, and a lot of money later, it was too late, and the person was, I think they were, anyway, they were let go from the position. But anyway, there's definitely a reason to have these controls in place to protect our system. Let's see, I've got a couple of questions. Going back to City Attorney, you were talking about, when talking about the citations and code enforcement, regarding stadium citations, for instance. Who has control over that, and how is that implemented and followed up? Is that through your office, or?
Well, we will, again, it's through code enforcement that would issue the citation. Mm-hmm. Unless, I think there are some, if it's a fire code issue, then the fire department would do it. But if it's some kind of planning permit violation or building permit violation, then it would be from that department's code enforcement.
Okay.
But we would advise if there's questions about how to cite or what to cite for or something like that. We would advise.
Oh.
Okay. The only add that I would provide is that the county also has a role in inspections and citations through the public health department.
Okay, thank you. My other, this is my last question. There's just been a lot of talk about the public records requests and the voluminous, I would say, amount that have been, sent to the city. Would you consider them, some of them to be frivolous? I mean, does the city look at them in terms of are these considered, harassment? I mean, just because they do become burdensome and
Well,
and taking away from your, precious time.
They do, and I don't want to seem like I'm I'm against transparency, because I'm in
yeah.
favor of transparency.
Right.
I think there's two issues here. I think one is it's not just the number of requests, because something might be very simple, and if we already have it in a public place and we've already produced it, then we just say, oh, here you go. But one of the big issues is, and I don't know what you want to call it, harassment or burdensome or whatever, but we get these requests that are so broad that they're I would call them a fishing expedition. They're just kind of trolling for a bad word that somebody might have said about somebody else, and it's so broad that they're just asking for, give me everything that this person ever said within the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then we have to go through and give them every email, and then they look through those emails and see, oh, did somebody say something off color, mean, noteworthy, newsworthy, from almost like a gossipy standpoint, as opposed to, did this really have something to do with city government? And it's an easy way for a media outlet to find something that somebody might want to read, mm-hmm. But it takes a lot of time to respond to those. I guess is basically what I'm saying, and there's also an aspect of expertise, gaining an expertise as to what's responsive to a request and what's not. But there's not a lot of room within the Public Records Act to say, oh, that's just too burdensome, I don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. That there is a concept like that, but it's a pretty hard one to reach. And when people are looking for specific information, our goal is to say, okay, what specific information are you looking for? We'll help you find it, and we try to do that. Mm-hmm. But when someone is just simply trolling for information and throwing out a broad net just to see if they can find something that they can say gotcha with, then it's, the Public Records Act does give them quite a bit of latitude to ask for stuff like that. Mm-hmm.
Based on, I know the city manager mentioned there was no tracking prior, or it's been tracked since 2017, the PRA requests?
It's been a manual count, so we worked with departments to get from them what they were tracking in-house as having responded to Public Records Act request. Mm-hmm. Obviously through the clerk's office. It's not an elaborate or elegant system. It's all manual that we're doing, and it's been since the beginning of 2018.
Okay, I'm just curious, what the number that the city is receiving now compared to years past? I mean, is there been a big increase, say in the last 2 years prior, compared to years in the past, or is it about the same? Do we usually receive about 1,300 a year?
We don't know, because we weren't tracking beforehand. Next year we'll have some trend data. I want to add some comments too. I support government transparency. You will see in our approaches of new approaches that we're bringing to more fiscal transparency through our budget document, which we'll present to the council, and as well as other measures that we've taken. What it becomes an issue is we look at our limited capacity and those employees, the 41 that we've been focusing on. It becomes really an issue of cost benefit, and with the drivers of workload, the initiatives, the critical paths that many of these are on, we do have to stop and respond to the records and do it as a manual process with a page flip. Councilmember Davis came in and I was ending my day with a PRA in front of me, and I literally had to tell her, today's my deadline, I don't have capacity, right? And I'm there personally doing it. And you start to recognize we've got real mission critical work to do. And on top of that, we have no resources that have been dedicated to Public Records Act request responses, and we don't have the technology in place. And that's where the issue really rests. We should always be able to provide our responses to these 1,300. It is when it weighs against other priorities that are mission critical to service delivery and advancing other parts of the organization.
Thank you both, and thank you, Lynn and City Manager, or City Attorney, for for your reports as well.
Okay, any other questions, comments from council? Yes.
Thank you for the report, both of you. Quick one, from the audit point of view, like any checks and balances in any organizations are great, and we're happy that you are in a place for that. And I know we discussed a lot about the financial part of it, financial audit. I would also emphasize that we should not leave behind the performance audits. Those are equally important, and down the line, we would like to get those reports on the same footprint as we are trying to do the financial audit of that. Thank you for that. Coming back to the attorney point of view, I have two comments on that. First comment is you're asking for a real estate attorney, and we do not have a real estate to have his office. That's a pretty big dilemma. And one thing I noticed was you mentioning the regulatory complete development and implementation of commercial cannabis regulation. So my point is just a procedural one. I saw some of our neighboring cities have already made a decision whether to do that or not do that. So are we trying to put a time into this thing before even council decides whether we are allowing commercial cannabis in the city, or how's the?
I think, last year, council made a policy choice to go ahead and try to regulate cannabis as opposed to banning it. We temporarily banned commercial cannabis activity so that we could put the regulations in place. And then we are coming forward, actually staff is coming forward, I think, February 19th, with the framework to get the go-ahead from council to put the ordinance in place. So you'll be seeing that very soon as to what the policy choices you want to move forward with in terms of writing it into the ordinance and making it legal to engage in commercial activity in Santa Clara within the state framework and prior council direction about what they were interested in seeing in terms of allowing for it.
So that's
I want to add to that. This is when we come on the 19th, we will bring some research on what's happening throughout the state around the falling market from a tax standpoint and revenue for local governments, because as we look at that research and make adjustments to our revenue projection, this was a very low revenue opportunity. It was 1.2 to at most $2 million. The changed market for cannabis and its relationship to revenue for local government, that's the first policy question, is when we look at the revenue range, from a cost-benefit perspective, is it worth pursuing and ramping up staff and a new regulatory program for which no staffing has been added, right? Is it worth then saying, let's move forward for, X amount of dollars?
Yeah, that was exactly my question. Like, right. We are not writing the whole ordinance before we even deciding about whether we should do it or not. Mm-hmm. Why would we invest that time into writing an ordinance when we have not even decided whether we want to go for it or not? That was exactly my question. And second, some emphasis which was also discussed in the recent California League of Cities discussions about you mentioned a lot about the camcorders and digital data we have. One other aspect is the social media, how we are dealing with the social media. That's also pretty clearing to look going forward, how cities or as a council members or management of the organization are acting on the social media, and what are our liabilities and what are we would like to have some more emphasis and your feedback on that, how to deal with that.
I don't think we've really had too many legal issues with social media. I think where you get into issues with social media, number one is, to the extent the city maintains some kind of social media presence, then all of that becomes part of the public record. But it's already public, so it's not a big deal that much. I think where you get issues with the city engaging in social media is you get issues perhaps with if you start censoring things. In other words, if someone posts something to your social media and then someone edits it out So is that a First Amendment issue? Are you censoring in violation of the First Amendment? You also get issues where, defamation. I mean, are we responsible for something defamatory somebody might write? So we haven't seen those issues come up with our use of social media. We have a lot of other folks who run our meetings on social media, on their social media sites, and we haven't really had any legal issues with any of those. So I'd be more than happy to discuss things that, observations you might have about, what we should be doing. I think we are looking at the city's social media policy, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about that later, but I'm not familiar with legal issues that we've been having with regard to that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Would you like to comment? Very good. So I don't think there are any other comments at this point from council, so that brings us to a lunch time here. And the setup here, Nadine? Excellent, very good. So I'm looking at, could we reconvene? Is 1 o'clock too soon, or do we need a little bit more time? More time? Let's do 1:15. Okay, let's reconvene at 1:15, and when we come back, we hear from HR. These are gaps. HR will do an assessment with your HR director, and then also procurement reform from your procurement manager. So we're on break until 1:15.